Okay, if everybody wants to get settled in, we'll go ahead and get started. We're probably starting a couple minutes late. I apologize for that. Again, I was told the clock on the wall is a little bit fast, but we are still a minute or so beyond schedule. So we're going to start out with Budget Committee orientation, and it looks like Aaron will start out with presentation today.
Good morning, Mayor, Council, Budget Committee members. Thank you for coming here today for our Budget Committee orientation. This is going to be a joint presentation between myself and our Finance Director, JC. I was going to say Hacksaw Rally because I'm going to tag myself out and he's going to jump in. So Hacksaw will be up here in a little bit after I provide some background on Budget Committee's role through this orientation process. What we're going to outline today for you is what is a budget? Where do I fit in as a Budget Committee member? How do I get to a proposed budget? Why is a budget structured in this manner? What are the important details? How do I read the budget document, and how do I read capital budget documents? And then through this process, when we're done or through the presentations, we're more than happy to answer any questions, and we'll open it up for your general discussion. So what is a budget document, and what is the budget? It really is a legal document. It makes lawful appropriations that give the city the authority to spend public dollars, which is extremely important. One of the most important things that a city council does is to ultimately adopt a balanced budget. It is a financial plan for the city for one fiscal year. Some cities do multiple years, but for the city of Grand Rapids, we do one fiscal year, and we do have projections into the future for a following second year. It's an internal control mechanism because we have appropriated dollars, which provides an opportunity for us to control the dollars spent and where they get spent. It is also a policy document because the budget follows the policies that have been identified by the City Council. And it is a public communication document. Many times people ask questions about programs or projects, and it's pretty easy to open up the budget when they're talking to me or they're talking to the finance director or any of our department heads, and we're able to provide them a story on what we're spending and why we're spending those dollars. So who makes the rules? It's very specific in the state of Oregon. State of Oregon has Oregon revised statutes that provides rules on how the Budget Committee works. ORS states that it is to establish standard procedures for preparing, presenting, and administering the budget for Oregon local governments. So our process through this, through our budget process and adoption, is very similar to what occurs throughout the rest of the state of Oregon because all the municipalities must follow this Oregon revised statutes. One of the key pieces is to encourage citizen involvement in the preparation of the budget before its final adoption. So every Budget Committee meeting that'll be starting up, and we'll go over those dates, has to have an opportunity for the public to provide comment on what has been discussed and what has been proposed. It provides a method of estimating revenues and expenditures and ultimately to propose taxes. It's a method of control for revenues and expenditures that promotes efficiency and economy when using public dollars because those have been vetted through this process, and then the municipality must hold true to that what is ultimately adopted by the City Council. So it starts off with the budget officer as designated as the city manager, and city staff prepares a proposed budget. So we are in the process right now of starting to put numbers together that we're ultimately going to be able to provide you with a proposed budget. The Budget Committee reviews, revises, and approves the budget, and then it ultimately becomes an approved budget. Ultimately, that approved budget then goes to City Council, and the City Council adopts the budget. Just another diagram visually for you because I'm a visual person, and this provides you an opportunity to sort of look at what it looks like. City staff provides a proposed budget. It then moves to the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee approves the budget, and then ultimately Council adopts the budget. And there's a lot of work that is associated with the city staff and budget officer proposing a budget, what I'm going to get into. The Budget Committee consists of the City Council and an equal number of appointees. So it's the City Council, who are 8 elected officials, and then also 8 appointed citizens for the Budget Committee. Your primary role is to hear the budget message, which you'll hear at this will happen at all your upcoming budget meetings. You'll hear the budget message. You'll hold public meetings. You'll hear public comments and get input from the public. You'll review and discuss the proposed budget. You'll make revisions to the proposed budget if necessary. And then two things that are very important at the budget committee level is you approve each tax rate and approve the budget moving forward for council to adopt. So the primary roles when it comes to what's the difference between the budget committee and the city council from a responsibility perspective. So city council has been elected by their constituents to set policies and priorities. So the city council sets the policy and priorities of the community. That is the service levels. Also is one of those things that they define. They create, confirm, and or adjust revenues. It could be a revenue from a standpoint of maybe a utility fee, or maybe it's a tax increment financing or whatever that is. They also confirm or change the budget based on the budget committee's approved budget. The budget committee's responsibilities are to confirm resources allocated for policy and priorities. So council will identify the policies and priorities. Through the budget process, the budget committee confirms that those resources are matching council's policies and priorities. You confirm property tax rates, which is a very important piece. And you also confirm or change any proposed budget items. So one of the things, for instance, that's a council responsibility, and one thing that you may be interested in also, is on March 16th, the City Council has a number of budget policy things they're going to provide additional direction to city staff for. This is going to help us develop the budget itself. For instance, on the March 16th workshop, council is going to reaffirm our budget policy, and they're going to get a look at our future financial outlook. They're going to go over our LB projects, and they're going to discuss any budget development, and we're going to have some budget development discussions. That's going to give staff that final policy direction that we're needed in order to provide a proposed budget to you, the budget committee. So council's going to address those policy issues with us. We're going to propose the budget based on those policy directions to the budget committee to then take a look at the allocation of resources based on council direction. So budget committee members, you hold public meetings. All budget committee meetings are subject to public meeting law, so we have to have a quorum to conduct business, and a majority is required to take action when you make a motion. At those meetings, you hear public comment. The budget is a public document. Once it is released to the budget committee, copies must be made available to the public. The committee must take public comment in each of the public hearings, and any member of the public may speak about the budget. So taking a look at the future and what that looks like, the budget calendar, the first budget meeting is set for April 28th. That's where you'll get the budget message. You'll hear the budget message, and we will ultimately have an opportunity for the public to speak also. Additional meetings that are put on the budget calendar are April 30th and then May 5th. During the first budget meeting, a few things will happen. We're going to nominate and elect a budget chair and a vice chair. Those are the individuals that will be running the meeting, similar to what the mayor does for the city council meetings. You will have a chair and a vice chair, which will help facilitate the discussion throughout the budget process. You'll adopt ground rules, so we all have an understanding of how we are going to be operating through the budget process. You'll receive the proposed budget and hear presentations of the budget message. Then we'll talk strategic plan and capital allocations, and we'll set schedules for future meetings, and that consists of your first meeting. Subsequent meetings after that, you're going to dive into specific departments and divisions and the proposed budgets associated with the policies that council have put forward. The strategic plan is an important piece to this. Just like the meeting discussion that's going to occur later on in March at the workshop, council provides policy direction through meetings like the March 16th workshop and through strategic planning. This year we had about a 2-day session where we sat down and we talked strategic planning, which provides direction to city staff on what is important for the community based on council and those priorities. We then match resources and allocate those resources to a proposed budget for your consideration. So there's a system in place that gets us to where we are today and gets us to where you will be at your first budget committee meeting. City Council reviews the state of the city through having discussions with all the advisory committee chairs, through discussions with staff, and through input from the public. We develop our strategic plan, providing direction through that process. We then, as you recall from the other thing, we propose a budget to the budget committee. The budget committee then, looks at that, it makes a recommendation, approves the budget, and then it's ultimately adopted by City Council. We monitor our programs and report out our successes, and we do it again. We do it every year. We have a minor review of the strategic plan, and our strategic plan we have established as a 2-year strategic plan. Staff budget preparation comes from the strategic plan, as I mentioned. We evaluate current service programs and levels. We evaluate current capital needs. We evaluate future services and programs to be provided, and we evaluate future capital needs. The city manager and the finance director have meetings with each department and division, and we perform a line-by-line review of that and make sure that the resources are matching council's strategic plan and the direction that council's provided from a policy perspective. Through those meetings, what we get as an end product is we get a proposed budget to you at the first budget committee meeting. I think it's important to note, I wanted to highlight that the city has taken a number of steps throughout the years to make sure that we are running efficiently and effectively. And every department and division within the city has pretty much had an external audit done of their services. This is what we called a PAVE program, Performance Auditing, Vision and Enhancement Program, where we had a third party come in and review those departments. And it's interesting and it's important to note that each one of those reports came through with something similar between all of them. It came through stating that we have staff that has exercised prudent stewardship of our resources, and that the community affordability awareness is there, and that we are ultimately operating very efficiently, effectively, and the majority of the departments and programs are running understaffed in order to provide the quality services that we're doing. So we're running very efficiently and effectively through those reports. I think it's extremely important also, before I ultimately turn over the slides to our finance director, that we highlight that we have, from a policy perspective, over the years, over the decades, tried to be good facilitators of public dollars. And we also recognize the challenges that we have with regards to trying to match resources with desired levels of services. Costs continue to rise, expectations of level of services continue to rise, and we've been managing that through sometimes budget cuts, through program level of changes, through also increasing revenues. And so this just provides just a snapshot of some of the actions that have been taken in the past when it comes to councils, trying to make sure that we're balancing level of service and affordability within the community. And we've done a number of things like public safety levies. We've tried a fire service districts, creating new service districts, and we've also implemented a utility fee to help level the expenditures, revenues with communities' needs when it comes to levels of service, especially when it comes to public safety and general fund operations. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our finance director, who's going to talk about the budget structure and our basis of accounting. Thank you. Yeah.
I like how he leaves me to explain the boring stuff, so we'll try and get through this as quickly as possible for you guys. Okay, so legally, we need to mention what kind of basis of accounting we use. So for the City of Grants Pass, we use what is called modified accrual. What most people are used to is a cash basis accounting, which recognizes transactions upon the exchange of cash. Expenses are not recognized until they are paid, and revenue is not recognized until payment has been received. That means that the future obligations or anticipated revenues or expenses are recorded in the financial statements in the year following. In contrast, we use accrual accounting, which recognizes expenses when they are incurred, regardless of the time of payment. And the charges records revenue when a legal obligation is created. This indicates the company has fulfilled an obligation and has earned the right to collect and say at the point when the goods are shipped or at the completion of service. So budget is organized by fund. A fund is a self-balancing set of accounts used to record estimated resources and requirements for specific activities and objectives. So all of the important takeaway here is all resources and requirements must be budgeted, and they must balance. And we do all this as good faith effort through our estimations. And I want to give you do have a packet of goodies that I gave you. In the packet, there is this piece of paper that talks about the last 10 years of current property tax revenues. So you could see, as part of our diligence of projecting revenues, we actually get pretty close to where we do project out those revenues for future time periods. So this is just a visual representation. This is state law. We do have to match the resources with the requirements. We cannot spend more than we're actually bringing in. So there are different types of funds. There's the general fund, which accounts for all financial resources except those to be accounted for in another fund. So basically, it's anything that doesn't fit into the rest of these descriptions. We have enterprise funds that are water, wastewater, and stormwater, and those account for operations that are financed and operated through dedicated user charges or utility fees. There's special revenue funds. Some of those examples are transportation or streets. And lodging tax. Why streets gets lumped in there is it actually receives gas tax from the state of Oregon, and so there's a dedicated purpose that we have to use those revenues for. There are capital project fund, which accounts for resources used for the acquisition or construction of major capital facilities. We have some debt service funds, which accounts for the accumulation of receipts, usually for improvement projects. There are internal service funds, so those accounts for financing of goods and services furnished by one department to another. An example of an internal service is finance, city manager. We consolidate all those into one area because it's cheaper for us to organize that way than every department getting their own accountant. So we consolidate those resources that Aaron's talking about. And then we have other funds like fiduciary funds, which is like the landfill, that accounts for assets held by a government unit in a trustee capacity. So one of the key takeaways here is the government does not necessarily function like your own personal bank account. So you, as an individual, will be taking money in, and you can spend it however you want. In the government, we have to take in those revenues into different buckets and ensure that those buckets are only spent on those items. We can't use water dollars to pay for sewer items, or we can't use water dollars to pay for general fund departments like public safety or planning. So the general fund is slightly different than other funds as it handles everything else by definition, and its largest revenue is property taxes. We don't have anything that dedicates by policy to public safety, but we choose to align our property taxes, both the levy and the permanent rate, and allocate them directly to public safety, which is police, fire, and support. And those revenues do not pay for the entirety of the service. The general fund has program and general support resources. So program resources are those dedicated funds I'm talking about that are going directly to a department. And then we have what we call general support. General support is our non-dedicated funds and our discretionary can be used across multiple program areas. An example of these are franchise fees, state revenue sharing, some of those dollars that just kind of get put into the entirety of the general fund, and then programs share those dollars and resources. So part of that visual representation is those blue arrows kind of coming in as far as resources are dedicated, and when they come out in spending, we spend those dedicated resources first, and then that general support kind of gets shared between the rest of the departments in the general fund. So some of the budget details: Oregon law allows local governments to levy 3 types of property taxes. So we have a permanent rate at a little over $4. The local option levy is $1.79. And then there is a bond type that we currently do not have. The bond is typically used for capital. The Oregon Constitution places limits on property tax collection. So Measure 5, which was passed in 1990, limits combined tax collection by general governments to $10 per thousand. And then Measure 50 was passed in 1997, which limits that growth in assessed value to no more than 3% per year for existing properties. And for us in the city of Grants Pass, here are most of the non-education rates, and you can see the total is about $849. And depending on where you live in the city of Grants Pass, there are 2 different school districts. And so not any one individual gets charged all 3 of these rates. They would either get the top or the bottom from the Grants Pass School District or Three Rivers. So some of the budget details: so fund balances, the city will maintain adequate fund balances to meet seasonal cash flows, support a good credit rating, to have resources to meet emergency or unanticipated expenses, and to have sufficient resources to begin the next fiscal year. The budget shall provide for an appropriate beginning and ending fund balance. Generally, the fund balance levels are dictated by cash flows, relative rate stability from year to year, susceptibility to emergency or unanticipated expenditures, its credit worthiness and capacity to support debt service, legal or regulatory requirements affecting revenues, and reliability of outside revenues. So as an example, most of the property tax resources come in November, and so we have had a 25 to 35% general fund balance or 25 to 35% fund balance target range for the general fund to ensure that there's enough resources to get us through those lean months at the beginning of the year. As Aaron mentioned earlier, this will be further discussion on March 16th. So now I have, here's a link, obviously, for those of us watching on YouTube. All this information is online. There's a link to our capital budget book. I have taken out snippets of this book, and we're going to kind of go over those. And it's this stapled packet right here in front of me. So I think there's some high-level things, if you take away anything from today, that make sure you read these before our first budget meeting. So this is pages 95 through 101, which is the budget process and financial policies. I'm not going to sit up here and read this, but I think this is all good information, especially for our first-timers here. There's also some stuff about Oregon budget law. Aaron mentioned earlier the strategic plan. There's some key revenue details, some key expenditure details. There's some capital budget summary, and there's some long-range financial planning, and you can see the associated page numbers on here. Now, specifically, I'm going to call out some other things. On page 30, there's a funding matrix, and it's the page that looks like this with the red boxes. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that this is how we balance the budget, and your transfers in have to match your transfers out, and your total resources need to match your total requirements. Again, it's part of state law. The next set of pages is the resolution. And so you can see the resolution that sets the adopted budget for fiscal year 26, which is our current fiscal year. And this outlines the programs and their availability as far as their budget capacity to spend in any one given year. It also lists out the transfers for every fund and the contingency. The next one, if you flip a couple more pages, it's going to be this example of Appendix B. And so there's a bunch of different statistics in the appendix section, which is page 328 that I have in your packet. This one's a good one as it shows kind of the breakdown of the revenue by type and by fund, as well as the expenditures and how they come out. And a key point, too, is these budgets always balance. And then you can see the difference in how we supply those services. So in the general fund, you can see that there's a lot of property tax dollars going in as resources. We can also see that it has high personnel costs because in order to deliver those services, it takes people to call for service as far as police, fire, 911, planning. When you go to the right and you look at enterprise funds, that story changes a little bit. The dollars associated with the revenues being brought in are more actually expended for capital. And you can see the nuances and differences. And within the budget in each department, when you flip to the next page right after that, you can kind of see that breakdown. And I gave you an example of the Parks Department and some of those program areas of how they utilize those resources that they are getting in dedicated, describing their services and what they deliver and what they provide the community. And those are pages 161 and 169 in your little handout here. The next one is page 35. I think I have this. It's going to look like this. Little orange box on the top, and I think I have this actually broken down a little bit easier so you can see. On page 35, how to explain this, which most of the budget document is laid out this way, is you will have 2 years of the previous year's actuals. You'll have the previous budget year next to that, and then you'll have the current recommended, approved, and adopted budget of the current fiscal year, which is highlighted in orange to make sure you're looking at the right year. And then all the way to the right, we actually project out an additional year as well. And what I want you to look at as far as page 35 is there is a discrepancy in the general fund as far as we utilize more, or we are set up in balance to spend more in any given year than we actually bring in. So that number at the top is your beginning balance that we started with fiscal year 26 and where we project to end in 26 and start fiscal year 27 is about $4 million as far as a decrease. So we are set up to spend about $4 million more than we are actually bringing in revenues. And the next page, at the bottom of page 36, you can kind of see that the resources match the requirements. The next page I want you to look at is page 132. Here's an example of fire, and I just wanted to show that there's the dedicated revenue sources, and you can see that they get some property tax, they have some grants, they have a piece of the public safety fees, some lodging tax, but there also is an additional amount that is required to balance their budget, and that's that general support that I was talking about earlier. That is that non-dedicated revenue that is shared within the general fund. As a different example, we do have some funds and programs out there with their own contingencies and ending fund balance. On page 287, you can see there's a red box circled around the contingency and the ending balance, and that is actually what we're proposing and or planning to become the beginning balance of the following year. I just wanted to show you that little slight nuance as contingencies normally are considered the beginning balance of the next year. Are we having fun yet? All right, so the next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the capital budget and how it's set up. For those of us viewing at home, there is a link. It is on the website. I have all this document, and you can kind of see there's red boxes in the pictures of what I'm describing. So I'm going to read some of this, but hopefully you can kind of view it a little bit easier on the page than you can on the screen. So there are major infrastructure service areas at the very, very top. This helps delineate which infrastructure service area this project is located or monitored, and that gets into potentially where the revenues come in mostly too. And so sometimes there are joint system projects, though the project is funded by both, there's only one project to track each facet. So what that means is even though we may have a sewer project, water may potentially give money to sewer, because at the time that they are replacing the sewer line, they're also going to go and do some water work at the exact same location. So they fund it all into one project, and that's where you'll potentially see sometimes an outside funding source from a different fund, and that is allowable. So at the top, again, there's the capital number and project name. These are delineated based on their number and their area. So you can see anything that starts with a TR is a transportation, DO is stormwater, WA is water, SE is wastewater, LA is solid waste, and LB is the lands and buildings fund. The estimated cost is the top right. So this is the best cost estimate at the time these pages are prepared. And we go through and we review these annually. Obviously, we have some projects out there, and I'll get to the estimated completion date, but we have some projects out there that aren't set to kick off even in this next budget year, but they are out there in the future. And so we would like to give the reader the information as to what we currently think that project may cost in the future as well. On the left, the blue box, there's a project created, so it shows the establishment date of the project. This can help inform as to the longevity of the project with ever-changing priorities and funding scarcity. So you will see there are some projects that we created maybe over a decade ago, and they just still are currently being worked on. The next is the estimated construction. Again, not all construction types we are saving money to do construction in the future for a future date. And so this is kind of giving you the heads up as to when we as staff assume to be either initiating the project or ending the project. And you'll notice that not all of the projects that we have in your capital book will be taken upon in the fiscal year that we're going to talk about in the budget committee. The next is the strategic plan. So this is going to link you to where we think that this project links into our strategic plan in the different areas, and we have different goals. So there's one for public safety, one for fiscal stability, one for economic growth, one for housing and homelessness, and one for infrastructure. And then we have various outcomes and expected results, and these are aligned to hopefully fit within those strategic plan items. The next is the project description. So to the right, we like to put some words as to describing the project. And then there's also a project need. This doesn't necessarily describe the project. It shows the real purpose as to why this project is a priority. And that's right underneath that, and that's all on the top side. So down at the bottom, this is the fun part for me. This is where the money is. So at the top, those are all your resources or revenues. On the bottom are your requirements, or those are your expenditures out for the project, and those shows you kind of the planned timing, and I'm going to go through this kind of year by year. So the first column of numbers is going to be the actuals spent through the previous fiscal year. It's also, the next is it's kind of grayed out. It's going to show you the adopted budget. Just because it's budgeted doesn't mean we do actually undertake that project, but normally that is the case. The column next to it is where we actually think we're going to estimate what we're going to come in comparison to the current budget. And you'll see that the plan can change mid-year, the priorities change, and so that project may be delayed or sped up depending on the need. The next column is going to be is an orange color, and that will be the current recommendation by staff to push forward as far as what the project activity should be for that coming year. And then the following year's projection is based on the current year's recommendation, and additional years projected to show the following year's potential plan. Again, some projects may be out in the next year and or future years. And so the last column is going to be the remaining future estimation. So after the current year's recommendation, we have some potential future years if we think that there's going to be construction out more than those 2 years that we show budgetarily, which can very well happen like the water treatment plant. And then the very last column is the totals. And again, that's to show you that the total revenues need to match the total expenditures. I do have as the very last page a specific example as far as the Spalding Industrial Park from last year. And you can kind of see, if you walk back through how to read the budget, you can kind of get a real life example as to how we do that through SE 6200, which is the Spalding Industrial Park wastewater infrastructure upgrade. I know that's a lot of information. But at this point, I'll turn back to the mayor if there needs to be further discussion or questions.
Thank you, JC. I would be looking to committee members as well as council. Does anybody have any specific questions on the presentation and the overlook that JC just presented? Doesn't look like anybody's jumping the forefront, so we might have to just keep going.
I might have put everybody to sleep, and I'm sorry. Or maybe it was the pizza, not me.
So you guys have this presentation material, so if there is any questions after you guys digest it a little bit, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, city manager, or even JC, and we can field those questions at a later time, because I know that was a huge download in one fell swoop. With that, I will say thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so that was our first orientation on the Budget Committee, and next on the agenda here, we have non-bargaining compensation and classification. As soon as she gets set up, Stephanie will proceed with a presentation. No pressure. Just a little pressure. Go for it. But we'll get your microphone, my microphone, we'll get in stereo.
Good afternoon, councilors. I know the mayor can hear, so I'm going to go ahead and get started because we do have a lot of information to get through on this one today. So again, we're back to talk about the non-bargaining compensation and classification adjustment. Again, I'm going to acknowledge that I do have a conflict of interest as my position is one of the non-bargaining positions. However, my role here is to present you with options and risks, receive your direction, and provide the legal parameters. I will proceed however council instructs. And as we've mentioned before, there are two things to keep in mind. First is that full implementation has already been included in the current budget, so funding for whatever council chooses to do is available. And second, we are talking about market and equity adjustments in order to be able to recruit and retain quality employees and compliance with legal requirements. These are not merit increases, such as an annual step increase would be, and it's not a matter of whether individuals deserve raises, it's a matter of whether or not the structure needs to be addressed. As we've talked about before, we're looking at updating our non-bargaining employee compensation and classification based on market analysis and pay equity law, which supports council's goal of fiscal stability. The goal is to balance the city's financial health and long-term sustainability with the need to recruit and retain quality employees and comply with legal requirements. So what we're going to do today, I like to do the background and status just to remind everybody of where we've come from since our last session. We're going to talk about the 90% of task force recommendation option, which was the direction that council provided our last workshop, and then I'll seek direction for staff to proceed on with. As we know, in 2024, Dr. McGrath was retained by the city to complete a market analysis, and that report was provided in October of 2024. So essentially, that's a year and a half ago was when the report came out. The data at this point that she relied on in creating that report is 2 years old. Her report focused on the positions themselves, not on individual employees. It grouped comparable positions based on an analysis of the duties and responsibilities of each of those positions, and it looked at trying to both bring wages into alignment with market, as well as address internal compression issues. As we know, we do have some pretty significant internal compression issues. She did not place employees on the grid, although she did note that the most budget-friendly was to place employees on the grid at the step closest to current wage without a decrease. And as we've talked about, that approach to it would actually result in pay equity issues, as well as an increased risk of future issues as new employees are promoted or existing employees are hired. Flip that, as existing employees are promoted and new employees are hired. She did not review any individual employees in their positions for pay equity compliance. That was left to staff. So again, our definitions. The market refers to external competitors in comparable jurisdictions, and she looked at the comparable jurisdictions by population as well as in Southern Oregon. She looked at And then compression is internal compression, where a lower track or subordinate position makes close to, or in some cases more than, the higher or supervisory position. These are the two components that Dr. McGrath looked at. She did not look at pay equity, and I'll talk about the definition there in just a moment. She used market and compression to guide development of the salary schedule itself. I did go back, based on council's discussion at the last workshop regarding Southern Oregon and Rogue Valley comparators. I did look at her raw data that she provided and broke it down by whether or not the jurisdictions that she gathered information from were a union comparator, which is the 5 up, 5 down that we've talked about, Rogue Valley comparator, or Southern Oregon comparator, as well as the overall comparator ratios. And based on her data from 2 years ago, Grants Pass non-bargaining positions were on average 12.6% below all comparators. The positions on average were 7.3% below Rogue Valley comparators, 9.4% below Southern Oregon comparators, and 14.5% below the union comparators. And the difference between Rogue Valley and Southern Oregon is Southern Oregon has the addition of Klamath Falls and Roseburg when she had those included. She didn't have data from the Southern Oregon or Rogue Valley comparators for a number of the positions. She only had union comparators on some of those, so it's hard to tell you kind of how every one of them fits, but those are the averages that I saw based on the raw data provided by Dr. McGrath. I also did not obtain any current information or determine which jobs in other jurisdictions would be used as comparators for Grants Pass. There are some positions where it's clear, a city manager to a city manager is a clear comparator. A number of other comparators are not, and I don't have the experience. I'm not a human resources professional, so to do anything more than look at her data would be essentially a new market study. So the last piece then is the pay equity. That's the legal requirement that more experienced employees cannot make less base pay than a less experienced employee in a comparable position. And as we've talked about before, compression on its own is not a pay equity concern. Subordinates under certain circumstances can in fact make more than their supervisors, and this often happens where long-term subordinates report to a newer supervisor or where overtime's involved. However, compression can indirectly lead to pay equity issues when a subordinate promotes, and because of the wage scales are so close together, they start at a new position at a step 5 or higher regardless of their experience. This can result in less experienced employees being paid more than more experienced comparables, which would then be a pay equity violation. So it really, when the pay scales are too close together, you run the risk of pay equity issues if you aren't very, very careful. Our current status, we have 49 non-bargaining employees, three vacant non-bargaining positions. It's my understanding that one of those positions actually will be filled in the near future. 24 of those employees have been with the city for more than 10 years, and 17 have been here more than 15 years. Council did previously approve that 3.02% cost of living adjustment to the current salary schedule, effective July 1st of 2025. That was implemented, and as we've talked about, there are some adjustments in progress where required by law. To some extent, we need council's direction before we can finish that work, because we need to know how council wants us to wait and adjust things before we can finalize. But some adjustments have been made, and some were just pending that final determination, and we will make those retroactive to the appropriate dates. However, even with the steps we've already taken, we have known pain points where we will have difficulty promoting, recruiting, and/or retaining, and where there are pay equity issues that cannot be adjusted for under the current salary schedule. And these are our known pain points. We've discussed them in depth previously, so I'm just going to do a quick overview of what those pain points are as they exist now. We have sergeant to lieutenant. This is a recruitment and retention issue as well as a pay equity risk. Essentially, sergeant detective pay range is the same as a lieutenant's pay range, but lieutenants are eligible for less in base pay incentive increases and cannot get overtime. This results in lieutenants making less than sergeant detectives. We have battalion chief to deputy chief, which is both a recruitment retention issue and a pay equity risk. The battalion chief's 6-step pay range is the same as deputy chief pay range through the first six steps. But again, there's less in base pay incentive increases, and they cannot get overtime for deputy chiefs. Office assistant to office assistant confidential. You'll also hear office assistant confidential referred to as administrative associate, because the recommendation is to retitle that position if a new schedule is adopted. Essentially, the office assistant pay range is higher than an administrative associate pay range through step 7. And an office assistant step 7 is almost the same as the administrative associate at step 8. Communications supervisor to 911 manager. Essentially, the communications supervisor pay range is about 9% of the 911 manager pay range, which results in the communications supervisor promotion to only 1 step lower than their current step. And generally, that would be a higher placement than would usually be justified by experience. So because they're so close together, it makes it difficult to promote correctly, and then we have the potential for pay equity issues going forward. It's a very similar situation with associate planner to senior planner. Dr. McGrath has stated that when starting a new position, it should generally take 3 to 5 years of experience to reach market average, which she placed at step 6. So a promotion with no same experience should usually not be anything lower than a step 4, absent unique circumstances. And with all of these positions that we've talked about, the promotions would be to the very top of the pay scale for the higher position. Finally, we do have unresolvable pay equity issues. As noted before, we have 1 or more positions that have been grouped as comparable by Dr. McGrath, but on the current schedule, they are not grouped. They're on different pay bands. This results in 1 or more employees at step 10 with more experience than an employee in a comparable position, but that person in the comparable position, even at a lower step, makes more money because that employee is in a higher pay band. So we can't fix that within the current structure. Our goal, again, we want to balance the increased costs with legal compliance, recruitment, and retention. So with that, that jumps us forward to what Council asked staff to return with at the last workshop, which is the 90% of task force recommendation. So the parameters were, what would it look like if council adopted a salary schedule that is 90% of what the task force had previously recommended? And we're calling this the 90% of task force recommendation option. It's not a recommendation that was made by the task force, it's a reduction to that recommendation. I did use step 10 for the step to reduce. The results were essentially the same no matter which step we used for it, and starting at using step 10 allowed for a more straightforward formula for Excel to make calculations. So that's why it's at step 10. What I distributed by email and again today is the current schedule, the 90% of task force recommendation schedule, and then a comparison document that shows some of the schedules that we've discussed, both the 90% one that you requested today, as well as the consultant's original schedule and the last task force recommendation schedule. It shows how step 10 at each of those compares, what the dollar amount is, and then for the potential new schedules, what the rate of change from current is. You will note that if adopted, the 90% of task force salary schedule would have 13 positions see a lower rate of pay at step 10 than what they are currently making. So that's 30% of positions would actually see a reduction in their maximum pay available. That would impact 21 employees, and that's 43% of the non-bargaining employees. 14 employees would actually be placed at a higher step than their current step in order to avoid a pay reduction because of the shift in their pay band. And 5 employees, which is 12% of the non-bargaining, already have a current salary that is higher than step 10 of the proposed schedule. So these employees would be frozen at their current salary and would have to be paid outside of the adopted salary structure, which is against city policy. City policy is that we have a salary structure and people get paid within that structure. So let's talk about the pain points that we've already acknowledged are out there with the current structure. You do have a new document that did not go out on Friday. It shows you what the pay rates are, as well as the incentives for all the positions we're going to talk about under this pain point analysis section, just because I know you want to have the numbers in front of you when we talk about what these are. So I want to make sure you had that information, hopefully in a fairly condensed version. But I'm going to walk through each of these and what the actual pain points look like if the 90% of task force recommendation were to be adopted. For sergeant and sergeant detectives who would promote to a lieutenant, adopting the 90% task force salary schedule would result in step 10 of the lieutenant pay actually being reduced. Not by much, it is less than 1%. I believe that the comparator says it is 0.17% less than what their current salary at step 10 would be. But this was already one of the biggest pain points in the existing pay structure, and so adopting the 90% would actually exacerbate that pain point. As you can see, current sergeants, step 10 base wage is $125,793, and I did round for purposes. I don't have the pennies on everything. The current sergeant detective at step 10 is $132,082. However, sergeants and sergeant detectives can increase their base wages through incentives, and those incentives include DPSST certifications of 2.5% for intermediate or 4% for advanced. They can get 1.25% if they have a second language. They can get 2.5% if they have an associate degree or 5% for a bachelor's degree. One thing I would note is that an associate's degree or the equivalent education and experience is actually required in that job description. A lieutenant requires a bachelor's degree or equivalent, but does not have any additional pay included in the salary schedule to acknowledge that. Sergeants are also eligible for 1% longevity if they've been there 10 to 14 years and 2% at 15 or more years. And I believe that's with the city, not just in that position. They are eligible for overtime. A lieutenant, on the other hand, has a base wage at step 10 of $132,298, and the only incentives that they are eligible for are a 2% increase for a master's degree or 1.5% for DPSST management. Language, they only would receive $50 per month. So what this means is a sergeant detective with an associate's degree, as required by the job description, would make more than a lieutenant at the same step. At step 10, Spanish fluent employees, sergeants and sergeant detectives would make over $1,500 per year just for that additional incentive. A lieutenant would only be able to get $600. A sergeant detective with a bachelor's degree makes more base wage than a lieutenant with a bachelor's degree, and actually more than a lieutenant with a master's degree. A sergeant with a bachelor's degree makes essentially the same as a lieutenant with the required bachelor's degree. And all of these do not factor in that a sergeant or sergeant detective can receive an additional 1 to 2% increase for longevity, which is not available to lieutenants. A sergeant detective at step 7 would promote to a lieutenant step 10, which, if city policy were to be followed, which requires a 5% pay increase for a promotion. And that's without any experience in those job duties, and they would be eligible for less in incentives. A sergeant detective at steps 8 through 10 would not receive the 5% increase of city policy. Moving on to battalion chief, and that is our most significant pain point from the analysis. That's where we see the biggest discrepancy. The rest of these, there are significant ones, but that's probably our biggest one. For battalion chief to deputy chief, there is some slight improvement to the existing pain point, but it remains unresolved. Deputy chiefs would have a wage scale increase of about 4.63%. Battalion chiefs at step 6 have a base wage of $138,223, and they have available incentives of EMT licensure of 3% for advanced, 5% for intermediate, and 9% for paramedic. A degree, they can receive $75 a month for bachelor's and $50 per month for Spanish. They do qualify for overtime. Deputy chief step 10 base wages are $154,304, which seems like a pretty significant jump, but remember we are talking about a 6-step to a 10-step pay scale there. Step 6 for a deputy chief would be $142,553. And they have some of the same incentives, but at lower rates. So for EMT licensure, it's 2% for advanced, 3% for intermediate, and 5% for paramedic. For a degree, they can receive 2% for a master's, but a bachelor's degree or the equivalent is required for the deputy chief according to the job description. So this means that when it comes to actual numbers, a battalion chief at step 6 with a bachelor's degree and paramedic license would make $151,562 before overtime. Deputy chief at step 10 with a master's degree and paramedic license would make $165,105. A promotion of a battalion chief from step 6 would have to go to at least a deputy chief step 7 without any experience and with less in incentives. Office assistant to administrative associate, this is another one where there's slight improvement to the pain point, but still some significant compression. Administrative associates would have a wage scale increase by 3.8%. And a step 1 administrative associate would have a base wage higher than office assistant step 1. Previously, their base wage was lower. Both positions, and you can see step 7 to step 10 on your sheet in front of you, both positions currently have the same incentives. However, office assistant is likely going to be receiving the longevity of 1% or 2% in the near future because their union has joined with Teamsters, which has that incentive. In addition, the Teamsters contract is up for negotiation currently, so we do anticipate discussions about cost of living and other adjustments to that salary schedule. So they're essentially the same at this point, and we anticipate increases to office assistant. An office assistant step 7 makes essentially the same base wage as administrative associate step 6 and would promote to administrative associate step 9. A similar situation exists with associate planner to senior planner. Again, with the incentives that will change due to the consolidation of the unions. Finally, the previous pain points that we talked about were the unresolvable pay equity. The 90% of the task force recommendation option would resolve our unresolvable pay equity because it would band together those comparable positions. So that at least would be fully resolved. However, the 90% of task force recommendation does create 2 new pain points. There may be more. These were the 2 that jumped out at me when I was looking at the data. Because of the way our progression currently works, we have communications supervisor to 911 manager and the dispatcher to communications supervisor. So a communications supervisor to 911 manager, because they would both be placed on the same new salary structure, there is enough space between them to resolve the previously noted concerns. But what it does is it shifts both of those back far enough that now it would create a pain point between dispatcher and communications supervisor. So a dispatcher, a step 7 base wage for a dispatcher is $83,496. They have available incentives of 2.5% for an associate's degree, 5% for a bachelor's degree, 1.25% for a second language, and 2.5 or 4% for DPSST certifications. They do qualify for overtime. Communications supervisor at step 10 is $90,029. At step 7, that comparable step on the grid is $84,837. For their incentives, they can only get 2.5% for a bachelor's, $50 a month for a second language, and 2.5% for an advanced DPSST. So a dispatcher step 7 that has a bachelor's degree in advanced DPSST speaking Spanish would make $92,054 before overtime. Communications supervisor with the same qualifications would make $95,130 without overtime. So those are very close together, especially when you start talking about the possibilities for overtime. A dispatcher step 7 makes more than a communications supervisor at step 6. So a dispatcher promotion from step 7 would have to be to communications supervisor step 9. And that's without any supervisory experience, and the incentives would be less. We have a similar situation when it comes to the records specialist to records supervisor. I would note that the communications supervisor and records supervisor are positions where that step 10 would be significantly reduced from current pay. I believe that the communications supervisor, it's almost 10% lower than current, and records supervisor is over 12% less than current. So that's why these pain points would be created. For the records specialist, the top pay at step 6 would be $68,006, and that's just slightly less than a step 5 for a records supervisor. And again, you see the same issues with the incentives between the two. So we would have a higher potential for a higher pay rate for a records specialist compared to their records supervisor. So we have the new pain points. Even though we do resolve some of our existing ones, it creates new by the 90%. A comparison of the options that we've talked about before. We're talking about the legal pain points, the recruitment retention pain points, and what the costs would be. The full consultant implementation would resolve our legal pain points. It would resolve our recruitment and retention pain points, but as we've talked about, it's the most expensive option. The task force recommendation does resolve legal pain points as well as the recruitment and retention. It's less expensive than the full consultants. The 90% of the task force recommendation resolves the legal pain points, but does not resolve the recruit and retain pain points, and in fact, it actually exacerbates one and creates two new ones, even though it resolves or minimizes some others. It would be a much lower cost. Restructuring the current, which we've talked about before, where we essentially band together all the positions that Dr. McGrath did to address those, the inherent pay equity issues, would resolve the legal ones, but it wouldn't resolve our recruitment and retention. It would still leave some odd results as far as position pay ranges. It would also mean that positions that Dr. McGrath has on a lower band would be on a higher band than others just because of how we would have to consolidate. But again, it's one of the low-cost options. And then the last option that we've talked about previously was public safety only. That one does not resolve our legal concerns because some of the restructuring needed is to salary schedules other than public safety. It partially resolves our recruitment and retention, but only so far as we're talking about the public safety employees. It doesn't resolve the other employees. And it would be a little bit higher cost than the 90% of task force and restructure of current. Also, the 90% task force and restructure of current options only resolve the currently unresolvable pain points. They don't address the actual structural issues that may lead to further pay equity issues, and it would require some very careful work going forward to make sure that we remained in compliance with the legal requirements. So one additional option that is out there is to update your market study. As we noted, it's 2 years old. Dr. McGrath developed that based on position duties and responsibilities, external market data for the comparable positions, using her proprietary formula that eliminates outliers, accounts for differences, and does a far more in-depth version than I could do using her data. It addressed compression between non-bargaining and union pay schedules and internal pay equity. But again, it's nearly 2 years old, and the pay equity safe harbor in statute only applies if there has been an equal pay analysis within the preceding 3 years, and only if progress is being made towards resolving those differentials. So you could request a new market study that council provides direction on what the consultant should be looking at and how the consultant should approach it. So with that, we're on to our staff direction. So some of the options available to council. We can engage a professional to develop a salary schedule pursuant to council direction. We can bring one of the options or an adjusted option forward for council action. We can bring additional information to a workshop for further discussion, or we can discontinue the non-bargaining wage adjustment work at this time and focus on something else. So with that, I will leave it to questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Any questions from council? I have Victoria, and then Rick, and then Eric. Victoria?
So, thank you so much, Stephanie. Can this, if we chose the 90%, can we deal with the positions that would be in compression or pay equity by taking those out of the pay schedule, like you mentioned, and then through retirement or attrition, hire back in at the wage that we created? That's the first question. Then I have one other.
Are you talking about the 5 individuals that, okay, so technically, yes-ish, and let me explain that. Yes, because we can't cut their pay. We can't do it. They would have to stay at least at their same pay. We would have to find a way to do that. There's probably a couple of different ways we can do it. I know it'll complicate JC's life if we have to go this route. We could kind of create specific bands, but we don't want to do that. We want to leave it as is. We could have to then address city policy that says that we will pay within, because city policy says we pay within our structure. We would have to revise our policy that we pay within our structure with exceptions under XYZ parameters. And so we could do it. It's just more complicated.
Yes, oh, thank you. And then could all of these be, I was listening to your percentages throughout, and I was just wondering to myself if it could be taken care of not taking anything out of a pay schedule if it was 95%, so 5% more, which would make it a little bit less with the money saving the council was looking for, and but not have any of these issues. And there was one or two I thought it wouldn't work with, but from what I heard, but I don't know what you can tell me about that right now.
If we increased it to 95%, and I can't run the numbers specifically, but I know that there are a number of the positions where step 10 is reduced by more than 5%. In fact, if you look, the task force recommendation, the original one has 3 positions that would see a slight reduction, not very much, but slight reduction. So no matter what you did, those 3 positions would still have a step 10 reduction. And then there are others that would have, so it would only resolve, just doing math in my head, 1, 2, 3. It would only resolve 3 of the 13.
So it would resolve some, 3 of the 13.
Yep, we would still have 10 that would be reduction at step 10.
And those potentially could be taken care of by being taken out, or at least some of those, possibly.
I just have to look at something here. We would have, I'm looking at the positions that, or the individuals that would see a pay increase to see if any of them would be resolved. It would not resolve any of the 5.
Thank you.
Further questions? I got Rick, Eric, and Joel. Rick?
Thank you, Stephanie. I was wondering if I could have some clarification. When the task force put together their recommendations, I thought we focused on step 6, not step 10. So when the council made the recommendation to do 90%, that was based on step 10. And was that step 10 based on the council's
It went back and forth at the last workshop, whether step 6, step 10. I did the math on both, and they're essentially the same thing. If you reduce the whole grid to 90%, it doesn't matter which step you start with. And so just for math purposes, I did step 10 because then I could just have Excel calculate reduce by 2 or 4% all the way back, as opposed to some having to be reductions and some had to be increases from the step 6. So the numbers are the same essentially on the schedule, regardless of step 6 or step 10.
Okay, so when I put the spreadsheet together showing step 10 and taking 90%, I was using factors that it was representing those positions throughout the state of Oregon, not just Southern Oregon, although I found the discrepancy between the whole state and Southern Oregon was not that significant. But the problem I'm having, when I did that, I came up with, of the high-paid positions, of those 15 high-paid positions, 9 of those were higher pay with a 90% than they were with level 6 by the task force.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand what
The task force was looking at trying to meet level 6, step 6.
Step 6 would be is presumed to be market average. That's what Dr. McGrath said where she put the market average at was step 6.
So what you're saying, we lowered the entire step of step 10, but we're still going to pay people at step 6?
The entire grid is reduced by 90%. So step 6 would be reduced by 90%, step 7, steps 1 through 10 all get reduced by 90%. I just did the math for step 10 because then you can calculate the rest. It all ends up being the same.
So what I'm hearing you say, when it comes to actually paying the person in that position, we could be looking at step 6.
Yes, not every employee is going to make step 10. But where I did my math, I started with step 10 as the starting point. So regardless of where you pick your starting point for that 10% reduction, the math comes out essentially the same for all the steps. So the
discrepancy I'm seeing in my figures, I focused on step 6, and our calculations are based on step 10, which is not how it would actually come out. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I got Eric and then Joel. Eric?
Thank you, Stephanie. I had a question in terms of these pain points. Would there be a way to increase the percentage of incentives and or maybe add an incentive to these specific pain points, these specific jobs? Instead of increasing the pay, how about increasing the percentage or add an incentive of some kind, knowing that we are having problems with those areas? Is that a possibility?
Potentially. It kind of depends on where you want to go with it, and depending on what you did, it could result in different pain points. So a lot of these positions, lieutenant, wherever they end up, there's another step above them, captain. So if you start giving incentives to lieutenants, now they're getting closer to captains potentially who either don't qualify for it or the same thing, captains to chief. Same thing with deputy chief to chief. We've got senior planner to principal planner. So you may cause new pain points by offering certain things or adjusting. And you're also talking about, the salary structure was developed by Dr. McGrath saying this is kind of the hierarchy of positions. So now you're adjusting hierarchy for certain positions that may, in effect, put them at higher pay rates than positions with more job duties and responsibilities. So you can, it's just better if you can offer similar incentives within similar pay structures. So you need to offer them for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I got Joel and then Indra. Joel.
So Stephanie, if you deserve a performance award for doing all this. So I'll buy you a cup of coffee, but I don't know if there's anything beyond that. Should be.
I'm here to answer your questions. Whatever you need is what I'm here for.
Okay. I had a couple of questions on your presentation. Thorough presentation. How is the associate planner and senior planner a pinch point? Because when I look at the associate planner, and let's say, well, pick any of the steps, I don't care, pick step 4. they earn $75,000. If they get promoted to senior planner, then you get 2 steps increase to the next one. So they would go from 75 to 90,000.
This is what.
So I don't understand how that's a pinch point.
It's a pinch point because of how high a step 7 would promote to. Because if you're at step 7 making a certain amount, anytime that you're hiring to step 4, 5, 6, anything above that, you're not allowing for that 3 to 5 years of experience within the position to get to market.
So
And
if you're at
it's more
step
of a-
7,
But
you
what-
make 84,000, and then if you go 2 steps above to step 5 as a senior planner, you make 93. You get a 10% increase in salary, but that's not and
You
you
do.
call that a pinch point?
It's a pinch point because if you bring in another senior planner, so if you promote an associate planner to a senior planner, they have bare minimum qualifications for the senior planner. They meet just that, but because they were a step 7 associate planner, they get promoted to probably a step 4, just based with no incentives, nothing. They would get placed at a step 4. But you bring in somebody from outside, a lateral employee with the same exact experience or even more experience than your associate planner, but maybe not a whole lot more. All of a sudden, they have to be placed at step 5 or higher on the grid, even without the experience. And neither one of those positions has the experience that would justify being placed at market average because they just don't have those skills yet. They haven't developed that experience.
So what I hear you
it's
saying
a
is
potential pay
it's
equity
not
issue.
the wage scale of the associate planner and the senior planner that creates the issue. The issue is how much you pay a new person coming in.
It's how closely they're related and where you put
Yeah.
the promotion, which then will dictate where you may have to put those new hires. So it's a potential
and that
for
probably
pay
can
equity.
apply to any position, I would guess.
The further apart the wage bands are, the
Yeah.
less likely you are to have those issues. Anytime the top of the lower pay scale promotes to step
Yeah.
1, 2, or 3, you're generally going to be fine. It's when they start promoting to the middle or top of the grid, that's where you have the potential for pay equity problems and/or either promotions or new hires are always going to come in at that top half of the schedule. So what's the point of having the lower half of the schedule?
Yeah,
Because
so-
nobody's ever going to be placed there.
So I heard what you said, and I understand what you said. When I look at step 4 of an associate planner and a senior planner, there's a difference of $15,000 between the two.
Correct. You would go from a step 7 associate planner, if you promoted, I believe a 5% increase would put you at a step 4.
Yeah.
So you'd go from 84 to 89.
I guess I would
to get that
disagree
5%.
that that's a pinch point, but that's my opinion.
In and of itself, it's not. That promotion piece is not a pinch point by itself. Where we have a potential pain point is the fact that you bring in a lateral, and now we have a lateral with no experience being placed at the mid or upper levels of the pay scale.
But that lateral would have
So-
more experience at that level, I would guess.
Potentially,
Yeah,
but you
that's
still
why they
don't want
get
to
paid
place
more.
somebody brand new with little experience
Yeah.
in the middle of the pay scale. You want
Yeah.
to place them on the lower end.
If they come in with
So
more experience, they should get paid
It's just,
more.
it's a potential for pay equity issues is what that pain point is. It's not it's not a mandatory compression issue. It's not something that's fully existing between associate planner to senior planner.
Okay.
It has to do with potential for
I'd
pay
be
equity.
interested in seeing that play out.
I mean, as an example, what you're talking about, what she's trying to explain is if you took an associate planner and you promoted them to senior planner and they go from step 7 to step 4, that's not a pinch, that doesn't seem like a pitch point. And then that's with the minimal experience as a senior planner. They're in their job for, say, 9 months, and we hire a lateral that has 4 years of experience. Or 3 to 4 years of experience.
More
And
experience.
You'd think that you would bring them in at step 3, 4, or 5. But if someone is at step 4 with less than a year experience, you have to take into consideration an individual that has 3 years more experience than that individual, and they would need to go up to 5, 6, 7 with only 3 or 4 years experience. They should be sitting at 3, 4, 5. And so what it does is it elevates everyone's step increases, and that happens very quickly unless you're going to have a pay equity issue. To resolve pay equity issues, you're needing to bring in people that you're recruiting outside the organization or even sometimes within the organization at higher placements initially than the structure is really designed for.
Well, we need to pay people what they're worth and what their experience comes in. And if a new hire comes in with more experience at that level, they need to get paid more.
But if our hiring policy says that somebody with 3 years of experience gets hired at a step 2 or a step 3. And because we have somebody with 1 year of experience already at a step 4 or 5, we now have to put that person that should be a step 2 or 3 at a step 5 or 6. And that's where we start ending up with issues.
Except their experience level at the, we can debate this all day.
We can. They have more experience, they should get paid more. That's Oregon pay equity law.
Well, yeah.
But if we're
I'm
assigning.
used to a system where if you get promoted, you go 2 steps above where your salary is the same.
And this is a very
And-
different
and-
system
and
than
it's- And
that.
it's done. Next question I had was the one slide where you talked about 90% of task force recommendation. It's just a clarification, Stephanie. Under result, are we at the same place? Yeah, result. Those 13 positions would see a step 10 reduction from a current step 10. And then there's 21 employees that would be impacted.
Correct.
So are those 13 positions part of those 21 positions, or are they additive?
Nope, those 21 employees are in those 13 positions.
Okay, so there's, okay.
Yeah,
so
some of the
there's-
positions have more than one employee with the same job title.
Right, okay, and we could fix that as well. Okay, the other question I had, and it's more of a philosophical question that I personally have struggled with, and it may not be germane to your world, or may not apply to your world. There seems to be an expectation on the part of municipal employees, regardless of their location, that they get a cost of living raise and a step increase every year,
Correct.
which is about an 8 to 10% increase in their wages every year, depending on the inflation rate. And not only that, but if there's initially 10 of those, once you run out of those, you go back and you get even more. So like it's like if you're at step 10, now you go back to step 6 and you get 4 more.
Only if the salary schedule's adjusted.
Yeah, and if the salary schedule's adjusted. In my world, I'm not used to that. I mean, when you're at 10, all you get is the cost of living from there on out because your expertise is at the top
Correct.
level and any marginal increases after that. So is it an expectation on the part of municipal workers that they get a step increase and a cost of living increase every year?
Yes, I've never seen a system that operated any differently for local government.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I got Indra, and then Rick. Indra.
Yes, I'm going to follow up a little on what Joel was asking you. We can look at associate senior planner. So when you're talking about pinch point, you're talking about someone at a supervisor making at or less than what someone they're supervising is at. Is that what
No.
pinch point is?
No. For purposes of associate planner and senior planner, what the pinch point is if you have 2 senior planners, one of which was promoted from an associate planner with the bare minimum of experience, and they promoted from a step 7, they would have to promote to a step 4, even with no qualifying experience that would put them at a higher step than step 1. Which means that if you hire an outside person to come in as a senior planner and that person has the same or more experience, they have to go to a step 5, even if their experience would only normally justify a step 2 or 3. It's not an actual existing pain point between the two, it's the potential for a pay equity issue under promotion and hiring circumstances down the road. It's a risk that we would have to pay very close attention to. So it's not an actual problem at the moment, but it's potential for a problem.
You could have an associate planner on step 6, or we have tons of employees at step, have been here 10 or 17 years, as you said, so they're high up. But then you could hire a new senior planner on step 1, correct? That
If they
has
have-
no experience. Are you saying,
If they have the same or more experience than an employee higher on the scale, they would need to be placed higher on the scale, otherwise we would have a pay equity problem.
but if they don't have that experience?
Then we could place them at step 1.
You would place them at 1, and then they're making less than the person they're
which is fine.
supervising. So
Yep.
it's fine to do that in
Yes.
circumstances.
Yes. It's
Okay,
all
because-
on associate planner and on office assistant to administrative assistant, those two, those are potential for an issue if we don't pay very close attention and make sure we're dotting our i's and crossing our t's. Those are pain points, but they're more like a bruise as opposed to a gaping wound.
Okay.
So it's a lower level pain point. It's still a pain point, and we have to pay attention to make sure that we don't violate legal requirements.
Okay, because you're using those terms in general, but they
Correct.
don't really apply to every situation. And so when we're throwing out one solution for every situation, it doesn't really apply in my mind. And then I had asked, we talked about retention, and that was a part of your presentation today. I asked for a while back more detailed information on retention. I never got anything.
I'm unclear about exactly what you want as far as when it comes to retention. We've talked about some of the things before that we do have anecdotal where positions have been declined due to our low pay scales. Promotions have been declined due to low pay scales. We've held off on posting positions because we know we won't be able to have a quality recruitment. We know that some employees, and I don't remember off the top of my head how many, but in their actual exit interviews, the questionnaires did cite higher pay elsewhere for similar job duties as a reason why they were leaving. But everything's basically anecdotal on that. And we also have the grumblings behind the scenes that we're hearing about the low pay and the people that are dissatisfied in what they might do. And so we have all of that as well. There's not a lot that's concrete and that I can say we have this many who left just because of low pay. Because people are always going to have multiple reasons why. And some people have weighted reasons why they valued one thing more than another. But we know that a lot have said low pay is a reason why they left.
Did you actually say we hold off on posting positions because we think we won't have anyone apply?
We have, yes. We have a lieutenant position that we're trying to find out what council wants to do, hopefully, because of the high levels of, because it is currently paid essentially the same as a sergeant, it's hard to, we know it's going to be hard to recruit.
Okay, so I don't want anecdotal, I'm not looking for that, I want just the data on retention, like what positions, what's our turnover rate?
About 10%.
In specific positions, that's what I would like to see.
Which specific positions?
All of
The
these.
non-bargaining?
Yes, non-bargaining, yes.
Over what time period?
The last year, say?
Stephanie, if I could just make a quick clarification. Regarding the lieutenant's process, we did post a process, so there is an application period currently. My concern is we won't get enough applicants to move forward with the process. We might, it's currently still open, but based upon what I believe is going on in the organization, I don't expect to get more than one candidate, for example, for this position.
Thank you for clarifying. Posting and seeing who you get is different from not posting at all.
Correct.
Because you might not.
It is an internal posting, so I need to find out if somebody's going to apply, and I may not get a number that I feel is sufficient to move forward.
Thank you, Chief.
Further questions? Rick?
So Stephanie, if I recall right, when the task force looked at the issues before us, we recommended this 10-step chart because some people are in 6 steps right now.
Yeah, all of the bargaining units, with the exception of the sergeants, are on either a 6 or 7 step.
Okay, so in part of that was the opportunity to go forward in the future for a pay raise. When I'm doing my calculations here, and again, I'm not an accountant, if you take 10% off of the task force recommendation, the resultant figure will be less than what they're currently earning. So if that's the case, then you're going to have to, if you slide them over to a similar level of what they're earning, they're probably going to be in a step 8 or 9 or even 10. And to me, we lose our purpose in everything that we're doing. Is that?
If I'm following you correctly, I would agree that if everybody's getting placed at those higher levels automatically, then you have a system that's already out of date.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Looks like I got Rob.
I guess I have a question more for the council than for Stephanie, but I'll ask it. Essentially, and I just want to also make a clarification that last time, the last time we met, we're calling this possible plan the 10% reduction of the task force by 10%. Well, that was not just an arbitrary figure, and it was, frankly, it was, I figured that out on the dais on the fly last time, but it wasn't an arbitrary figure. That 10% less than task force is almost exactly the average of what the 5 cities in Southern Oregon pay. And like, for instance, Public Works Director, the task force, well, we can start with, and then I'll get to my question, but the consultant salary for a Public Works Director would have topped out at 226, the 226,000. The task force recommendation was 209, and 10% less than that is 188. When we look at Southern Oregon, Roseburg topped out 176, Cave Falls 185, Ashland 187, Lake Oswego 187, I don't know why that's in there, Medford 199, et cetera. So basically 10% less than the task force, and that's true for every one of these, whether it's the Public Works Director, Community Development Director, like Community Development Director, 10% less than task force is 174.6. The other cities in Southern Oregon were 162, 173, 185, 193, et cetera. So the 10% less than task force was putting us right in the middle of where Southern Oregon is paying their managers. And that's to me, when we're going to say 10% less task force, I'd rather call that the Southern Oregon average. And so now, if I'm going to call it that, which I am, at least I'm going to call it that, the question that council needs to answer is, where do we want to be with our pay scale? This is a policy decision. This has nothing to do with Dr. McGrath. Dr. McGrath was never asked or never instructed or never given guidance, actually, for this aspect of it. Does council want to basically pay our management group on average roughly the same as what the managers make in the rest of Southern Oregon? And if the answer to that is yes, that happens to be about 10% less than the task force. So if that's, I think that council should probably, I'll make a motion, or council should discuss that. Do we want to basically pay our managers, our non-bargaining positions, roughly the same as what the other managers make in the other 5 cities in Southern Oregon? If the answer to that is yes, we have a target. We can call that 90% of task force, but basically the target is Southern Oregon. So if everyone agrees with that, I'll go forward. But McGrath was never asked to do that. Staff in 2023, when council gave staff direction to go forward with the study, staff never asked council, where do you want this to be? Do you want to average? Do you want to be averaged with? Do you want the end product to be representative of Southern Oregon averages? Do you want it to be representative of Pacific Northwest averages, statewide averages? Staff never asked council to give that direction. They went to McGrath and said, just give us the figures. Now, somehow McGrath came up with figures that are 20% higher than Southern Oregon, and that's pretty accurate. And if we want to pay this, what I would consider to be an exorbitant amount, all these pain points and all these other things just miraculously go away, okay? And we can accomplish that by paying 20% more, by I would say overpaying by 20% of what people make in Southern Oregon. I personally don't want to do that, but here's I guess my question. We've got so many details. A question for Stephanie, actually, or for Aaron, more for Aaron. We have so many details here that, of course, we're all, council is all non-professionals in HR. As a matter of fact, I don't think we have a professional HR person in the room today. So all these details seem to be very daunting to someone who's not a professional in HR. And that might be different if we had an HR professional in the room today. But since we don't, we're going around and around trying to figure out ways to possibly put a salve on all these different wounds or be able to figure out a final product without having an HR professional involved. But what I will say is this: we know, because we've bargained fairly recently with the police union and the fire union, et cetera, we know that our police and our fire in ballpark, make a ballpark of what those other 5 cities in Southern Oregon make, because we keep seeing those figures. Those figures are always given to us every time we bargain. And in fact, maybe our police might even be making, I think they were very gracious when they actually did agree to, I think, take a little bit less, possibly, than what that average was. But our unions are making approximately the same as the other 5 cities at this point. So here's my question for Aaron. If our unions are making approximately the same as the other 5 cities, and the other 5 cities are paying their managers 20% less than McGrath, how can they do it, but we can't do it? How can every other city in Southern Oregon do what I believe, at least what I want to see, and I believe probably council wants to see, every other city in Southern Oregon is able to do it? Why can't we do it in Grants Pass? Why is our staff unable to come up with that formula?
So one, I think instead of looking at anecdotal discussion of salaries of other 5 cities with all the multiple positions, you would need to really look at the data on each of the bargaining units and compare just the local 5 cities that you're wanting to compare to non-bargaining.
I'm not talking about anecdotal. I'm not talking anecdotal. We got the figures right here on the page. That's not anecdotal.
So as I continue my explanation, Counselor, we would need to look at the data of like for like and make sure that we're looking at non-bargaining and the 5 cities that you want to compare with the rest of the bargaining units and those same exact cities, to then have a discussion to see if the premise that you're talking about is correct. We don't have that data in front of us, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to make that assumption unless that data is right in front of us. I think when we're looking at, we've discussed recruitment and retention and those kind of things, and that's something, but it in totality is the way we need to look at, we should be looking at this system. In theory, doing a local 5 and setting non-bargaining at local 5 is great. We'd be happy with that, and we'll move forward with it from a non-bargaining perspective. We want to get something adopted, and we want forward progress, and I think that would be wonderful. In order to keep that to where there's some consistency to where we're not dealing with pay equity and succession planning issues, you would need to look at the other 6 bargaining units and do the exact same thing, because currently right now the 6 bargaining units are comparing not the 5 local cities that you're wanting to compare with the non-bargaining. And so you have an inequity with the comparators. The bargaining units based on Oregon arbitration are 5 up and 5 down based on population. And so those are going to give you different numbers than the local 5 cities. Mm-hmm. And so to keep non-bargaining in a position where we're not trying to look at the issues that we've got today when it comes to compaction, compression, and pay equity, we need to look at the system as a whole, and non-bargaining should be looked at the same as bargaining. So if you want to set the standard for non-bargaining to be the 5 cities, we should move forward in any future bargaining sessions with the bargaining units with the same comparators and stand firm on that, so we can have the whole system as a whole appropriate, which would allow us to have succession planning, allow us to be able to promote and appropriately and put them in the proper places without pay equity issues.
So I understand what you're saying, and there's a tremendous illogical aspect to what you just said, and I'll point it out, and it should be clear to everybody as soon as I say it. When you're saying that our unions are basically being compared all around the state, right, rather than just Southern Oregon, that means our unions are actually going to be paid a little bit more than they would be if they were just compared to Southern Oregon. So the bottom line is it would even be even easier for us to come up with management pay if we were to compare to the other 5 cities, because our unions theoretically would be compared to the entire state, whereas in fact we're just talking about Southern Oregon. So it's the fact that the other 5 cities in Southern Oregon are able to do this using probably slightly higher data from around the entire state for their unions, and yet they're still able to pay their managers a rate that's much lower than what our consultant said, and they're able to pull that off somehow. All 5 cities do it. We should easily be able to do this. Our job is actually easier because we're only looking at what the other 5 cities are doing. They're doing it successfully. We're not able to do it for some reason. And it's like they're doing it right now in real time. And our unions are making approximately what their unions are making, and they're still able to come up with management pay that solves probably most of these details, if not all of it. So they're all able to do it. You know, I mean, you know, you want to call that anecdotal. It's not anecdotal. I got the figures right here on the page, and actually JC could look at the figures right now for the unions. That's not anecdotal. That's not pie in the sky. That's just arithmetic. So, you know, again, we don't have an HR person in the room. And I would also say that part of how we got here is likely because we didn't have HR people on an annual basis who were really looking at some of the internal equities as they came up, and we didn't actually put out small fires each and every year if we had to make a slight adjustment here or there. We haven't done that as far as I know. So part of moving forward, Stephanie's talking about in the future we could have, you know, specific significant problems as different, well, in the future we have an HR director theoretically every year who's going to be looking at some of that, and there could be small adjustments made every year. But again, I'm still asking the question, how is every other city in Southern Oregon able to manage and come up with paying their managers approximately 10% less than our task force, 20% less than McGrath? Every other city is able to do it, and yet we're sitting here fumbling over details saying that it's so difficult. Everyone else is doing it.
May I make one statement on that quickly? The Oregon pay equity law is a fairly new law. It's only within the last few years. So the fact that we're 18 years since our last market study and nobody was on top of pay equity, there wasn't a law for them to be implementing. So it's only recently, within a couple of years of when this market study was commissioned.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate reminding us of that. Nonetheless, we have 5 other cities in Southern Oregon that are functioning under the same state law that we're trying to function under. I understand how we got here, or how it got so out of balance. You know, that's, I guess, a different, you know, I think that's what you're addressing, is how did we get so out of balance?
Yeah, it's a combination, and the pay equity issues, which some of the pain points are primarily that pay equity concern. 5, 10, 8 years ago, that wouldn't have been an issue because the law didn't apply. So it's not that somebody didn't stay on top of that particular piece that put us into legal troubles.
Okay, well, moving forward, though, if we have somebody that stays on top of small differences, I would imagine we can put out small fires rather than gross restructures.
Absolutely,
in the
and that is
future.
the intention.
Right. So when you say, well, you know, yes, that would work this year, but it may not work next year. Okay, well, next year we can put out small, and we should assume that we're going to have to do that, almost no matter, unless we want to take Dr. McGrath's grossly inflated figures that are so out of the ballpark they're not even a consideration. Unless we were to take that, if we take anything that's even close to a fair, reasonable deal for our taxpayers, then we can assume every single year that our HR director is going to have to bring certain small little tweaks back to council. Not a big deal. And I don't think that council should be intimidated by the fact that not everything is going to be perfect for years into the future with whatever we decide. That shouldn't intimidate us, because we're going to have to make adjustments as we move forward that were not done in the past, again, for the reason that maybe you stated. But again, to me, I'd rather call this 90% of task force, I'd rather call that the Southern Oregon management pay scale, because that's exactly what it is. Or we can call it the 90% of task force, but that's where it came from. It's not an arbitrary thing. So to me, you know, if we want to address, again, the retention thing, I'd have to ask council even, do we even have a retention problem when 41 of the 49 people in this group have had 10 years or more of tenure? Do we even have a retention problem? I don't, you know, granted, we're going to have an anecdotal story about this one left or that one left or whatever, but I don't personally believe that we even have a retention problem if 41 out of 49 have been here 10 years or more and are on step 8 or more. We don't even have a retention problem. So you know, I don't want council personally to be intimidated by those words. Could we have a recruitment problem? We could, but let's actually be real here, and especially when we don't even have any anecdotes about, Indra asked for stuff, we don't even have any anecdotal stories about that.
So Rob, you're going in circles at this moment in time, but let me interrupt you 1 second and let me remind the council. You are a governing body of 8 people making this decision, so for you to say that the staff is telling you not to make the decision, that's a little bit grossly misrepresented. You guys have the ability to make a motion, go forward, and make a decision. You guys have, as a council body, have asked for more and more and more information because this is a very hard subject to get through. I completely understand that. But at this point, you have every right to make a motion and say, I want to do X, Y, Z, and get the rest of the council on board to go forward.
Thank you. So, okay, thank you, Clint, for keeping me on track. So, and I'll just say that, one of the reasons that we've asked for more and more and more information is everybody intuitively knew and then actually mathematically realized that Dr. McGrath's recommendations were completely out of line. So since we didn't want to accept that and take a rubber stamp on that, we asked for more information. So I'd like to make a motion first that council, wants to try to solve this situation with our non-bargaining to have us be at or around the average of the 5 other Southern Oregon cities for their management group. I mean, is that our goal? So I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, there's a motion on the table to, are you asking council?
I'm asking council, is that what council wants? Is that what council wants? Do we want this end product to be at or around the average of Southern Oregon management?
Joel, did you want to weigh in on that?
I would ask Rob to make an amendment to his motion if he would so prefer, that we would engage a professional, develop the salary schedule pursuant to council direction that would include just what you said. And then if there's anything there that needs to be changed from that, we can change it.
That would be the next question. After, I think we'd vote on my motion first, then we can make a second one.
But
Yeah, Rob's basically
our
giving you
goal?
guys a direction.
What's our goal?
Yeah.
And then how do we get to that goal?
Right, that professional is going to be absolutely necessary, and then the council direction needs to be absolutely clear.
Right. So
Okay, so you have a motion on the table to lead the council in a direction to restate.
that our management pay is at or around the average of the 5 other Southern Oregon cities that we've been talking about.
Do we have a second? Joel is a second. All right, any further discussion? Victoria and then Indra. Victoria?
When you were, this is for Stephanie, when you were going through all of this, I know that you included Southern Oregon. How far out and how many other cities are outside?
So there were, I believe, 18 comps that Dr. McGrath used in a variety of ways. Some of them didn't have local comps.
And you use all of those in this?
So, well, what I split them out. So there's 10 that were considered the union comps, that 5 up, 5 down. There were a couple of extras that are essentially union comps. There's a couple of cities that have very similar populations, and 2 years ago, they actually may have been flipped, but they're so close in there that I called them a union comp because they're not a Southern Oregon city. So the union comps, and then I had the Rogue Valley, which is Grants Pass to Ashland, and then the Southern Oregon, which also added in Klamath Falls and Roseburg. There would have been, so if we had, I believe there were 12 that would be considered the union comps, so that would mean there were 6 or 7 of the comps were either Rogue Valley, Southern Oregon, or both.
6 of the 10?
Yep, of the 18.
Oh, 6 of the 18?
Yes.
But, I thought you said you
Yeah.
reduced that to 10. I misunderstood that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we are asking question or discussion. Oh, sorry. We're asking question or discussion in regards to Rob's motion. I had Indra and then Rick, and then Rob wants to weigh back in. So Indra, please.
Yes, I think we all agree that McGrath was way high, and then the task force went by her figures, not checking. So in my view, they were high also, which is why we're still discussing going lower. I'm not opposed to that. I know we had 7 pain points early on that we were told those, or legal problems, those were supposedly all taken care of. Although at the last meeting, it seemed iffy if those were taken care of. So we're not in legal trouble. We took care of those 7. Is that right, Stephanie?
We have taken care of a couple of them. There are a couple that, depending on how we assess experience, whether or not we're weighting it or not, which is a policy decision of council that we have yet to receive direction on, is whether or not there's a pay equity concern there. So we're waiting for that direction to determine whether those last couple are in fact issues, and then we will make them retroactive to the same date as the ones that we've already resolved, so that nobody's being treated differently.
Okay, and I understand the problems between the non-bargaining and bargaining, and it's tricky, but I mean, the union wages are unsustainable at some point. I hope we can all agree to that, and there's a reason we have non-bargaining versus bargaining, so part of our staff is not unsustainable. I would be against just wholesale 10%ing, although it's better than nothing, because some positions are very skill-oriented. The police and fire have certain requirements, and it's more difficult to get those. Attorney, you need more schooling and skills and professional degrees. So and then some positions are administrative assistants, while very important. I'm not saying they're not important and we don't value people in those positions, but you can get a plethora of applications for people coming into the positions. We run into a lot of issues with the lateral moves, as we heard earlier, which is not bad. You want to promote people from within your organization, and a lot of times they do move laterally, which creates problems as well. So as Rob pointed out, we are always going to have to be looking at these issues going forward. I just think getting raises, and this is just step one, in a bunch of positions of $6,000, 10 across the board, it's like getting a huge bonus. And I don't know that the city has the funds to do that. And I don't want to bring that to the taxpayers. Thank you.
Okay, so further questions and discussion in regards specifically to Rob's motion in a direction to go forward. I had Rick, and then Rob, and then Victoria and Kathleen. So Rick?
This is a very complex subject, and that's one of the things that the task force really looked at. And a lot of the comments that Aaron made I found valid. We want to be consistent. We want a whole system. One thing we got frustrated with McGrath, we asked her what the yardsticks she used, and the nomenclature for that is called a rubric. She would not disclose what that was. It's proprietary, and therefore we had to do somewhat of a guessing game on what would be included and was not included. But I felt the task force did an excellent job in looking at the whole perspective we had before us and came up with results that would also recognize not only Oregon pay law, but also the competition within the city, which the union, even though they're union, they are employees of the city of Grants Pass, and other employees need to have similar pay scales as well. But the other factor is this is very complex, so it's a decision needs to be made on what issues will be used and not used. But the other thing that always bothers me, when you have a smaller group that you're taking a survey from, like 5 people instead of 10 people, or 5 cities instead of 10 cities, your results can be skewed as well. So I still appreciate the work that's already been done by the task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And just to reiterate, I don't think if we do choose a path forward, like Rob's trying to basically heard us in a direction which is actually positive. I don't think anybody's going to discount any of the hard work that everybody's been involved in. So, but thank you for making that statement. I have further discussion in regards to this motion. I have Rob, Victoria, and Kathleen. Rob?
So I just wanted to be clear, because I don't know if all the counselors, remembered or have the same sheet in front of them. But to be as clear as I can with this motion, I'm just going to read to you what, again, and I've done it before, what the Southern Oregon cities, are paying, say, a city attorney. Roseburg tops out at 162, K Falls 194, Medford 204, Ashland 212, and right now the task force was recommending 200, the consultant was recommending 215. So actually what I'll do is that's the city attorney. I can pass this piece of paper down and everybody can take a look at it. I'm going to circle on this page what 10% less than task force was, just for that. One clarification I'll make is that for city manager, let's see, the task force recommendation was 235. Let's see, the consultant was 254. Right now, let's see, we've got Ashland's 226, K Falls 235, and when we look at our current city manager's pay, you also have to include the fact that there's $18,000 more in different, there's deferred comp and other things that he's also making that it's not on this list. But I'll just pass this down.
Okay, further discussion on the motion at hand. I got Victoria, Kathleen, and Joel. Victoria, and then Indra. Victoria?
So before I would vote in the affirmative on this motion, I would need to know what the definition of Southern Oregon is. You just mentioned 4 cities. Is it just those 4 cities?
There's five.
Okay.
There may be some additional that you would want to consider, also including, I know that the consultant looked also, so the ones that the consultant had on her list as well, we had Ashland, Central Point, Grants Pass, Jackson County Fire District, for comparison for fire, Jackson County, Klamath Falls, Medford, the Medford Water Commission, and Roseburg were some of the ones. So there's a couple in addition to the actual local government units that she used.
I don't know about anybody else. I have no idea exactly what the Medford Water Commission means. I don't know what a fire commission means. I kind of know what the word city means. They all have, city managers, and they all have the same similar structures.
Those would be for very specific positions.
I think I was asking the question, and so, but that brought up a little bit more. I mean, the entities you're talking about, they just do their city a different way, and it's the position, correct?
Right.
That you
So,
would
for
need
instance,
to encompass
the fire
in
district,
Southern Oregon.
Yep, the fire district would have comparisons to the fire positions. The water commission would have comparison to the public works director because of how that's handled. That's why those comparators were, under limited circumstances, included on there. So it's more, potentially, if council wishes, more than just actual city limits because of how they're structured.
Can you clarify, Stephanie? So Medford, though, does have a fire chief.
Yes.
Okay, but now you're saying there's another fire person
There's
in there.
the Jackson County
And yet
Fire
another.
District. Yep, so the fire district, it's like city and county. A city or a county administrator and a city manager have very similar duties. They may be in the same jurisdiction. Do you want to include county level positions as well as city?
I know, I just said 5 cities. To me, I wasn't looking at counties, and there's a lot of other titles around Southern Oregon, but I was looking at 5 cities because it seemed like they were the best direct comparison to us, and that was
so you're talking about
Roseburg, Grants Pass, Central Point, Medford, Ashland, and K Falls.
So specific cities as opposed to Southern Oregon jurisdictions, because those are two potentially different
Yeah, I'm not an
things.
expert on that subject, but that's what it seemed like to me would be the most reasonable comparison.
And my interpretation of your action, Rob, is basically to get it more centralized towards our location versus all the cities across the state that
Correct.
might not.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Further discussion in regards to this motion, I have Kathleen, Joel, and Indra. Kathleen?
So I think the concern is the why we're so hesitant to just pass something is along the lines of what Indra said. And that is that, you know, we're being projected with the budget a 4 million shortage, and we're looking at, you know, establishing huge increases. And, you know, what we don't want to have to, you know, not be able to pay people once we decide this. So it's like, I feel like we're being put in a really difficult position, being forced to choose a structure, being forced to say, well, yeah, we want to pay our city what the average is in Southern Oregon, but can we maintain that? So it's one thing to say yes today and another thing in a year, which is very questionable after hearing the numbers that JC gave us today.
I just want a clarification point. JC? I was making sure that you were full chew mode right there, buddy, sorry. So when these conversations have been had in the past, I was under the understanding that the salary structure reconfiguration was taken into account from the original McGrath study into future budget. Or future budget was taken into those accounts.
So I think I understand the question, so let me say it back, just to make sure.
Yep, please, because I know I just butchered it.
No, you're good. So yes, in the fiscal year 26 proposal, based on where we were at the conversation at the time of pulling together the budget, to give council the maximum flexibility to make a decision, what McGrath proposed was in the fiscal year 26 budget. Seeing some of the other information come out in the direction that kind of council is going, we probably will be not at that level for estimating a fiscal year 27 budget when it comes to these positions and personnel.
Understand that. The first part of your answer was all I was looking for.
Okay.
But thank you. Further discussion on this motion, I have Joel and then Indra. Joel?
Well, the other thing is, and we haven't gotten to that one where the professional engages it, but those incentives, I wouldn't be against addressing that. And the other thing I wouldn't be against addressing is overtime, as long as it was managed, and it has to be approved ahead of time by the supervisor.
Many of the positions wouldn't by definition qualify. They are exempt under
But we
law.
could, under city policy, have it that way.
I don't believe you can. You can't do overtime for legally exempt positions. It's a legal standard of what an exempt position is.
Yes, you can. At least you can at the federal level. I got it as a GS-13. I was in charge of the outfit. So I don't know what labor law, if there was a state law that prohibited that. But anyway, I would be looking at making those consistent across the board. We need to pay people what they're worth, but we don't need to have those automatic 10% increases every year with that comparative thing, so.
And thank you, Joel, but we are trying to keep our discussion to the motion at hand, which is basically just giving us a direction going forward. Further discussion, I have Indra and then Victoria. Indra?
Okay. And I think in order to make a decision on the motion, we do need to hear what people are thinking, so we know how to vote on that, even if it seems outside a little bit. So I wanted to ask Rob with this motion, because this paper is just basically department heads and specific positions. So are you talking about just for these or for the entire page of non-bargaining?
Well, basically, I'm using non-bargaining and management as synonyms, but to me, and again, today, we're not actually even voting on today whether or not we would approve this plan once it's brought back to us. At that point, we could discuss whether or not we think that the taxpayers want to go for it, quite frankly. But I'm just saying as a way to as a way to move this forward, I'd like to see what this looks like with somewhere at or near the average of the Southern Oregon cities having their non-bargaining, this being brought back to us with what the non-bargaining looks like if we're going to average to the other cities in Southern Oregon, which is where I feel we're competing against for retention and recruitment primarily, is people that want to live in Southern Oregon. So that's what I'm looking at. Just what we have in front of us is just the top person, but we go down from there, and it's going to be similar in all the cities. But I'm saying that we have a working model in 5 different cities that's doing approximately what it is we're trying to do. Why do we need to go outside of that pay range? I don't see it. So whether or not we're actually going to vote to approve that at some business meeting some Wednesday night, that's a whole different other question. But
So you are talking about all of the non-bargaining positions?
I'm talking about all the non-bargaining positions being somewhat similar to the average of what we see in Southern Oregon. Yeah.
Thank you. And so with that said, I'd just like to point out a concern that even all Southern Oregon cities aren't the same, and it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that Josephine County is one of the lowest socioeconomic counties in Southern Oregon, meaning we have more poor and needy people and seniors on fixed income than any other county near us. And I think we also need to look at the tax base of some of these cities. So when we mentioned Central Point, I know that Central Point has very high taxes. Their property taxes are way higher. So when we make a decision to be at the average, do we want to be at the average of Southern Oregon cities? Because do we want to then increase our taxes to make sure that we can pay for these average Southern Oregon salaries? I'm not sure about the other cities. Some are probably below. Ashland's probably higher. So I think we need to look at their revenue and tax base coming in as well.
So you didn't mention Roseburg or Klamath, but they're below us.
Further discussion on this motion, sorry, there we go. Further discussion on this motion, I have Victoria.
So I'm still not clear of all of the cities that are going to be involved, and I would be inclined not to vote for this if we didn't include something like the Jackson County Fire District or the Water District, because they are the entities that are in Jackson County that have the positions that we're discussing now. So will you further define what Southern Oregon means? Rob, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And just consulting with Rob, sidebar here, just a quick moment. I think his ultimate goal here is just to get more information that's more centrally located to our geometric or geographic location.
But it's still not clear of what that geolocation is. We don't have a clear definition of what Southern Oregon means. To me, that means the coast. It means Brookings, So, I mean, it's going to mean different things to different people. So I think before I could vote in the affirmative on this, I would need to know what does Southern Oregon mean.
I think three times I defined what I meant by Southern Oregon. I'll say it again. That would be Roseburg, Grants Pass, Central Point, Medford, Ashland, and Klamath Falls. The 5, I would call the major cities in Southern Oregon. So that's on the 3rd time now I've defined that.
And you did not include the Jackson County Fire District or Water District, so there would be jobs that we are discussing that would not be in, that wouldn't be included in this. So I couldn't in good conscience be for this. It's just not well enough defined.
Okay, and to clarify the motion, it sounds like we're trying to get council to get more information from staff. So we have a motion on the table. We've had some robust discussion. Any further discussion? Indra?
Yes, I'm not opposed to getting more information, but I would like us to address this more specifically to the departments. And then also, I'm not opposed to additional incentives for some positions. I thought that was a good idea.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table in regards to getting further information based around the cities that Rob had stated for Southern Oregon, as to use, I believe, is more comparison. Any further discussion, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I'm for this, but I would like to see some more information the next time we come back around. I mean, the step broken down by steps is great, but ultimately it would be nice to see year by year, you know, what the cost is, because ultimately that's what we're voting on, right? Is how much is this going to cost taxpayers for year 1, year 2, year 3? Because again, I can look at all these numbers and it's fine, it's data, it's good, but I would like to see it as, you know, a larger picture.
Thank you. So you have a motion on the table, and I've been watching Stephanie make diligent notes, so I believe that she fully understands where we're going with this. So you have a motion to accumulate more information for comparison with a second. I'm going to go into a vote on that. This is not that you are voting that this is the end-all, beat-all. This is realistically getting more information for comparison in a better geographical location. Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Indra?
Yes.
Rick?
No.
Victoria?
No.
Joel?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Yes.
Kathleen, yes. Seth?
Yes.
All right, majority rules on that. So Stephanie, you do have full direction on the information asked to be brought forward?
We know the information that wants to be brought forward. I would suggest that the council discuss whether or not to have a professional do this evaluation. I don't have the skill set to be able to compare what comparable positions would be, and I don't know that we have anybody on staff that would be able to have the bandwidth for that. I think Aaron can address that a little bit further.
From an HR perspective, we don't have the bandwidth to do this, and at this time to have another study, we would recommend that council allow an opportunity for us to do an RFP based on the direction for today. We bring the RFP back to you, and you can determine a consultant to move forward to work with to get you this data.
And I believe that was going to be a further discussion or nomination from Rob, but
I just wanted to ask Aaron a question. So right now, since we seem to have, we're a little bit understaffed in HR, I guess is the best way to say it, we probably have an excess, or we'll say excess in the HR budget, because I don't know that we've been paying everyone that we're budgeted for. Would that be correct, that we have funds in HR that we could put to this that have already been currently budgeted for?
Yes, there'd be funding through HR. There'd be no necessary need for a budget change to fund this study.
so Rob, do you want to make a further motion?
Then I'll make a motion that, given the specific direction that we gave, that we hire a professional to cross the Ts and dot the Is and bring us back a working model.
So we have a motion on the table to get council direction to issue an RFP for a professional to do an evaluation in a more geographical location as stated in previous motion. Is there a second? Joel's got a second. So further discussion on that motion. Victoria and Indra. Victoria?
So we started off with a McGrath study, and we did not like that study. And so we made a task force that came up with a recommendation, and then we decided we were going to go 10% below that task force to accomplish the goals that the city wanted to. And now we are going back around full circle to another consultant. And that does not make sense to me. I think we have enough information to where we could come up with something with all the options that are on the table without another consultant. And it seems to me maybe like it's just a little bit of buying time, quite frankly. And so I am totally against this.
Thank you. Further discussion on this motion at hand. I have Indra, Joel, and then Rob. Indra?
I am completely against getting a consultant. It's a waste of money. I find it hard to believe that we don't have anyone on staff that could collect some basic data, which is all we're asking for. Thank you.
Further discussion on this motion. Joel?
Well, one of the things that I'm concerned with is we don't have a human resources officer on staff. And this is instead of having that human resources officer do this, we need to have that skill and that legal knowledge. And then where we do run into points of adjustment or whatever, that they're legal and that we move forward in an appropriate manner. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time and spinning our wheels. So that professional, if it's our own human resource officer, we don't have one. We need to contract one and get one.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion? I have Rob.
Yeah, I completely agree, Joel. And the fact that we've got funds budgeted for that position or for that work to be done makes this a really easy decision, because, as Stephanie has just said, she's actually been carrying the baton here for the last several months, and she has just basically said that this is over and above her ability level. So since I don't see anyone on the council that has a higher ability level than she does in this area, we need to actually bring an expert in to, as ridiculous as it may sound, unfortunately, we just don't have the HR expertise within our organization right now, and that's all we'd be doing is getting that, because we've heard it said that there's no one confident right now that they can take it to that next level. That's why we need to hire someone. Otherwise, we're, again, just spinning our wheels. We'll be back here with all kinds of pain points again that we are not going to be able to resolve.
Any further discussion on the motion? The motion at hand is to send out an RFP for a professional consultant to do the work as stated in the first motion, with clarification that we would not have to rebudget for this, that there is monies available for it. Any further discussion? Eric?
Not sure if it's legal or not, but I mean, I know the task force we asked the task force to do a certain thing, to come up with a better study or to add their information on there. I guess I'm going to ask the question, can the task force possibly look into this and compile that information, or is that asking too much, or is that even legal? I don't know.
I think that that's asking too much. One of the things, and one of the reasons why I don't have the bandwidth or capacity for this, is because it involves actually comparing the specific duties and responsibilities of each position to other positions, gathering that information. Not all of it is, my understanding is Dr. McGrath had to sign NDAs with because some of the information's not part of the public records, because of the duties and responsibilities, and making sure that you're comparing apples to apples in determining where positions should be set. That's the detail level that you have to get into, because you don't want to compare positions that aren't essentially the same. And in some cases, you're talking about two positions that, when combined, makes up the duties of one position. So things like that, we just can't do that analysis. The task force, that would be a huge ask, probably far more than what they've already done. They would have to go position by position. We'd have to make those requests for all those details, and they'd have to sit down and analyze each and every duty and responsibility between the comparators.
And my interpretation is that task force is made up of bodies of the public as well as staff and counselors, and their duty is to basically digest information presented to them, not for them to do research based. That's just my interpretation of it. Further discussion on this motion? I have Seth.
Yeah, I mean, I think early on in the task force, this topic sort of came up. You know, if we wanted to go super in depth and break it down by position, and we all agreed that wasn't the best use of time for the task force, and nor do we probably have that much time to do that. You know, I think that ultimately, you know, we didn't commission the McGrath study. That was before us, before most of the council, I guess, or the new council. And I mean, frankly, last year's been frustrating, to say the least, talking about this over and over again. You know, I think at the end of the day, it's going to cost money no matter what, right? Whether that's, you know, a task force time to commit to doing it or hiring somebody to do it. I'd rather just hire someone that this council agrees on, and yeah, move forward with that.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table to put on an RFP for a professional to do the research as stated in the previous motion. Not seeing anybody jumping up for further discussion, I'll go into a vote. Rob?
Yes.
Indra?
No.
Rick?
No.
Victoria?
No.
Yes.
Joel? Eric?
No.
Kathleen?
No.
Seth?
Yes.
All right, I have more no's than yeses, so the motion fails. So I'll bring it back to council for any further questions in regards to Stephanie's presentation or the whole topic at hand. Seth, question?
Well, what do we do now?
It will sit most likely until somebody has the capacity to work on this. There's just, I don't know what we can do.
I don't know if there's any cost estimation on a third party. I don't know if there's any numbers from like what McGrath roughly cost or ballpark.
Yeah, McGrath, I think was 24,000, so.
It was budgeted for 24. I believe the actual invoices were
Was
about
18 or something, so 18, 20. So it'll be likely under $20,000. You'd be very specific. You're talking about 5 cities and maybe less, but I don't want to give you a number up front. As mentioned, we do have monies for the project, and as we mentioned before, just internally in-house, we do not have the bandwidth, and even if we did have the bandwidth, the cost would be something likely similar for us to do and take the time to do that. So due to the situation that we have, staff would still recommend that we hire someone to get this accomplished for council.
Well, I mean, I think that at this rate, you know, I would think that council would want a third party to handle this, not staff. I would assume, based on the conversations we've had over the last year. I could be wrong. And again, you know, no matter how you look at it, it's going to cost money. I mean, whether, again, even if the task force agreed to do that, that's money that each individual person's losing out on, because it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of expertise, you know, when you get down to these numbers. So,
Further discussion? Rob?
Yeah, I'm not sure, it's not even at this point a question. I'm not sure why any counselor would ask staff what to do now. I'd like to hear from anyone who voted no what they think we should do. You know, you must have some positive way to move forward. But the thing that concerns me the most is that we have our staff we've seen has inherent, built-in 100% conflict of interest on this issue. Like, they are benefiting from this. So it would make a lot of sense not to task them, not to basically task the fox to count the eggs in the hen house. So, you know, but I'd love to hear from anyone who voted no what your positive way forward is here, because staff already told us what they think it should be. 3 counselors told us what, you know, thought how we could positively move forward. Anyone who voted no and put that negative out there, let's hear some positive. How do we move forward?
So we have further discussion in regards to the toll topic at hand. Rick, and then Indra. Rick?
Well, I've got my opportunity to say no, and I guess I would entertain a new motion. It is a very complex subject. I guess I want to also recognize the effort that the task force put forward. So I guess I'm also expressing I'm willing to change my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And to clarify too, I don't think anybody is discounting anybody's work effort or time that's been put into this topic from day one to this point. So further discussion of Indra and then Seth. Indra?
I think the hiring of the first consultant was a complete disaster, and I really don't see why it doesn't seem that complex what we can do. Is it, can a council member come up with the figures and numbers? Can we do our own research and supply it? Is that acceptable or no?
I mean, theoretically, yes, but do you have the experience of being able to determine what those apples-to-apples comparisons are? That's where the HR experience comes in. You would have to be able to get the job descriptions, as well as, I know Dr. McGrath actually surveyed the current employees for what they actually do on a day-to-day basis and how that might compare. So it's those kinds of things. Without an HR background, I would struggle with being asked to do that, because that's a high level of detailed analysis that you really should have a background in that area for. Not saying that somebody without that background can't, it's just a matter of whether or not it would be done according to HR standards.
Right, and I'm not saying I have the expertise to do that, but I know people that might, so that's why I'm asking.
Yep, and they may not have access to the same data that Dr. McGrath did because of the level of detail she was able to get from the jurisdictions, because of the way she approached it.
Further discussion, I have Seth, Rick, and then Joel. Seth?
Yeah, I just want to say too that I was on the task force, so I'm not discrediting what we did. I think we set out with, here's what we were asked to do by council, and so we tried to do the best we could on that. And even I didn't agree with all of it, and that's fine. So I think we still did a great job. The other question I have is, if we put an RFP out for this, is there a way that council could review, top 3 choices and, determine who we want to move forward at that rate?
So yeah, normally the process and what I talked about council ultimately choosing is we would do an RFP. We bring them in. We can do what our normal process is. We normally score those and then make a recommendation to council. They'll be providing a price in their services, and then council ultimately determines who they award the project to. So that's the normal process. And that's the process that I would follow unless council provided another direction. So it would be coming to you for approval.
All right, further discussion, I have Rick and then Joel. Rick?
I want to reaffirm what Stephanie said. This is a very complex subject. And one thing I like to do when I put together my spreadsheet and so forth, I like to validate other people's information. So I started doing my own research. And I found this is a very complex subject, especially when you're trying to contact another city and find an employee that you can't find, and then find out what their job description is and start comparing it to 5 or 10 other cities. And you could spend 10 hours on one position. So 10 times 50 positions, you're going to be looking at a lot of man hours in there. Are you willing to do that? And do you have the background to do that? Do you have the right questions to ask? I found it was very intimidating, and you need a consultant that knows what they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Further discussion, I have Joel.
Well, the other thing that strikes me is there's a reason why you have a human resources director, or you have somebody that has that skill. And that's because we're affecting people and how much they get paid. And we want to make sure that we do that in a legally defensible manner if we're challenged, which we probably won't be. But we owe that to our citizens and to our employees.
Thank you. Any further discussion and or motions or actions? I got Indra.
I would rather just work with the cities that McGrath put forth that are in Southern Oregon than add a couple more cities and or districts and spend more taxpayer money on this.
Any further discussion? Any further action? Victoria?
Of the cities that were mentioned, those 5 major Southern Oregon cities as they've been put forth here, are they on the study, McGrath study now?
So in McGrath, we've got Ashland, Central Point, the Grants Pass, Medford, Roseburg are the ones that she had in there. I would note that she does not have data for all 5 of those jurisdictions for each of the positions that she looked at. There are, I have to go in and look, let's see. So she does not have the data for economic development manager, housing and neighborhood specialist, parks superintendent, utility billing or customer service supervisor, payroll specialist, HR technician, detective sergeant or sergeant detective, which was at the time I think she started looking at it, they were part of the non-bargaining. They've since been removed. 911 manager, 911 systems manager, 911 supervisor, police records supervisor, assistant public works director, superintendent for streets and stormwater, wastewater facilities, or collections. So all of those positions have no Southern Oregon or Rogue Valley data with Dr. McGrath's data.
So that, I counted 15 there, and because I heard it that McGrath could not find that information. It seems to me like, could anyone find that information? So that would be my question.
And it may have been that those jurisdictions declined to respond on those particular positions, and maybe that they don't have comparable positions. I don't know the answer to that. There could be a variety of reasons for it, or it could be that they just don't exist, those positions.
Further discussion? I got Rob.
Yeah. So I think Joel makes a really good point. Whenever we're done with this process, we may be done today, I have no idea, but whenever we're done with this process, it needs to be kind of legally defensible. That was one of the 3 reasons that we even started this, was legal issues, retention, and recruitment. Personally, I've already said I don't think retention was an issue, but it has to be legally defensible, and as Joel said, it needs to be fair to the employees. So to me, if something's going to be legally defensible, that's not something that us counselors will scribble down on the back of a napkin. This has to be done professionally, and if we can't, and we've been told already that Stephanie is not confident moving forward to complete this process. We've got money budgeted in our HR for someone who would be potentially competent. But the other issue is regarding what McGrath studied and what McGrath didn't study. I personally want to move on from McGrath. I don't really care anything about McGrath because I think McGrath really botched this completely. McGrath was not given, I believe, appropriate direction. They weren't given, certainly wasn't given the direction that we just gave as far as where we want this focused. And I don't particularly trust a lot of what McGrath's conclusions were. So because her proprietary formula came up with things that were 20% too high. So to me, I want to move away from McGrath because that I don't believe that McGrath, as far as the structure of certain solving of some of the problems we had, I think McGrath probably did a decent job. As far as the dollar amounts, I think McGrath did a terrible job. So I'm not really interested in moving forward with any of McGrath's data in that regard.
Further discussion? I got Joel and then Indra. Joel?
Well, and real quick, Gordon on the task force, I apologize, Gordon, what's your last name? Blankenbeck, yeah. This was actually his suggestion. He suggested it to me, and he was on the task force. And he said, if you really want to do that, you need to do it right.
Further discussion? I got Indra.
Do we have any idea when the city might have an HR manager?
We'll provide an update at a future meeting.
All right, any further discussion or motions or action from council? I got Seth.
I would make another motion. I think we should move forward with a third party again, with the expectation that council gets to, obviously approve who we're working with. Ultimately, we could deny it again. We could say no then. But again, we're going to keep costing money, staff time. It doesn't really matter, right? Whatever way you look at it, it's going to cost some type of money. And I think, I would rather have a third party do it again because, there's going to be bias naturally in the staff, and that's fine. That's human nature. I would never ask my staff to create their own pay schedule. I think that's, nothing against them, but I think that's, that's not their job duty. And so I think that's, makes sense for us to, again, hire somebody out that, will do a good job. I think too, I think we all want to be fair to the staff. I know I do, and so it's not about being unfair. We just have to balance, the public and spending money and saving money and, making sure that we're doing it fairly across the board. So, yeah, making a motion.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to proceed forward with an RFP for a third-party professional consultant to do more investigation in regards to the first motion on the table for more geographical location. I've got a couple seconds in there, so I'm going to take Rick as a second. Any further discussion on this? Eric.
Can we make an amendment to that motion to include incentives adding an incentive or increasing percentages to those pain points, those areas, so that we can at least make this study worthwhile and bigger bang for the buck, I guess.
That's a question to to Seth, who made the original motion.
Can you explain it one more time? Sorry.
So can we add the caveat of, for those pain point areas, to have them include or increase incentives, percentages, and/or add an incentive of some kind to help with those pain points, so that we're not overpaying and instead offering incentives for higher pay, if that makes sense?
So evaluate the incentive structure in addition to the local market.
Correct, for the pain point areas.
Well, and that's a very specific one tool. I think a better motion may be for the consultant to review and make recommendations on any potential pain points in the alleviation of such. They may have a better idea than that, and so it's very specific there. So I'd open it up to providing an opportunity for the consultant to provide their own recommendation.
I like it.
So Seth, do you understand the friendly amendment to your motion?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so a motion to put out an RFP for a third-party professional consultant with a caveat that consultant will identify pain points and have the opportunity to offer suggestions for alleviation of those pain points. That's the full motion at hand with a second already. Any further discussion? All right, we'll go into a vote. Seth?
Yes.
Rob?
Yes.
Indra?
No.
Rick?
Yes.
Victoria?
No.
Joel?
Yes.
And Eric?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
And Seth was first one, so that one, yeah, that one passes. So we do have a pass of a motion to issue an RFP for a third-party consultant
Thank you.
as described.
I believe we have direction.
We have
on
direction.
it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so since that was a motion that basically staff has been directed to bring back more information and a process to provide that information, this topic is now concluded, and we will go next on our agenda is to discussion of removing the city manager from the non-bargaining compensation salary structure, and we have Aaron to start us off with a presentation.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Council, for providing direction on the previous topic. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that today's discussion involves the compensation structure for the city manager position, which is my role. For that reason, I want to be clear that my purpose here is not to advocate for any particular outcome. My role today is to provide the council with factual, neutral, and organizationally relevant information so you can evaluate the implications of keeping the city manager within the non-bargaining salary schedule or establishing an independent compensation structure. I will present the pros and cons of both approaches, outline operational structural considerations, and answer any clarifying questions you may have. I'm committed to ensuring that the information you receive is objective, complete, and helpful as you determine what is the best long-term interest of the city from an organization and the community we serve. Council's decision on this matter is fully within your authority, and I will support whichever direction you choose. We're here to discuss, Council expressed a desire to discuss the placement of the city manager in the non-bargaining salary structure. We'll evaluate whether the city manager should remain within the non-bargaining or be placed independently of the non-bargaining salary structure. The current structure, the city manager position, is currently included in the non-bargaining schedule. It has a defined salary range, and there's 10 steps to that structure. So, broken it down, pros and cons for both, keeping it in, keeping it out. I tried to provide as much pros and cons as possible. Maybe I missed something, and if I did, if you'd like to add or subtract, that's great, but these are for your discussion points, if you so desired. So keeping the city manager within the non-bargaining salary structure, pros, there is some internal alignment and consistency, treats the city manager consistently with some of the non-bargaining employees. reinforces organizational equity and fairness narratives. There is some transparency and predictability as it is seen, and you know what the step increases and ranges are, simplifies communication to employees and the public on what the city manager's range is. It does provide some budget planning stability, as you know what you may look for in the future when it comes to progression of the city manager's salary. And it does reduce some perception of arbitrary adjustments, which can be seen sometimes with city manager changes in salary. From a negative perspective of keeping it in there, there is some limited executive compensation flexibility. It may restrict council's discretion in setting compensation because you are set within a structure already, so you don't have additional flexibility. And it can constrain competitive recruitment, as maybe that whole salary range is out of whack with the salary structures of others. And so it does create some issues there potentially if it was left in. There could be a potential misalignment with market conditions, which I was sort of mentioning. And then there's a symbolic distinction. Structurally, it may not provide the bandwidth needed to distinguish the city manager level responsibilities as compared to other department directors. The city manager is uniquely appointed by the city council, which is the only one as such. So there may be a desire to have that separated from the salary structure. Now, making the city manager independent and non-bargaining salary structure, there could be some pros that you can consider. There is, if the city manager is independent, there's flexibility to tailor compensation. Salaries can be set based on market, experience, and negotiations on an annual basis, and so there is additional flexibility there. There's a clear executive distinction. It reflects the city manager's unique governance relationship with council, as opposed to colleagues within the organization under the salary structure. And it may, from a competitive recruitment and retention perspective, allow council to compete directly with the current market rates, as you can change those on an annual basis easier and provides that flexibility. From a con, it could reduce salary transparency, as there is not a predetermined low and high range that the city manager may make, and that may be considered a con, maybe require more explanation around rationale and methodology for what is provided to the city manager on an annual basis. Requires a little more administrative oversight by council, as you are the one determining that instead of it being predetermined in advance, so there may be some more discussion from that perspective. Potential budget variability, as it is not projected out and seen of what it might be from year to year, so there may be some variables there that is not predictable from a budget perspective. And potential perception issues without a structure, without the clear guidelines. Decisions may be perceived as arbitrary or maybe individualized as the decision is made. So I just put together a small little scale here where you've got the different dimensions: transparency, flexibility, market competitiveness, going down the list. It's sort of what I already went over on the other 4 slides when I mentioned the pros and cons. From a general governance perspective, regardless of whatever decision you make today and direction, the city manager still serves at the pleasure of the city council. Compensation adjustments do require council approval no matter which one you choose from. An annual evaluation process remains intact. Governance considerations as you move forward, and this is where I open it up for questions, but then ultimately for direction from you and general discussion. Is the priority structural consistency or executive flexibility? Does council value alignment with other non-bargaining staff or more of an executive distinction? And what best supports long-term organizational stability? And there are some alternatives there, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Aaron. Council questions? Victoria.
So since we now are going to be hiring a consultant, I would just want to see if council wants to roll this into the consultant, so we have good feedback from this consultant that we are going to hire. It could be just the presentation as presented here given to the consultant. Since that is going to happen, it might be a better idea to get this professional consultant to give us feedback.
So I would look at that as more of a discussion item for council at this moment in time. I was just asking, is there any questions for Aaron in regards to the presentation that he just presented? we're going to table you for 5 seconds, if that's okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Mayor,
much.
Council.
Thanks. Okay, back to discussion. So Victoria has made discussion point and seen if council had any appetite to roll this topic into and put it on the plate for our third-party consultant with all the other information they're going to be presented. So with that, I'll bring it back for further discussion. Joel and then Rob. Joel?
Well, first off, I think Victoria has got a good point, regardless of which alternative we select today, or if we don't select an alternative, to get that feedback from the consultant on the salary for the city manager. That's a very positive thing. The other thing that strikes me is we've put Aaron and Stephanie, to some extent, if not a conflict of interest, the appearance of a conflict of interest, and that's hard on. That's hard, and that's probably not appropriate for the way we do business, that we automatically put our employees into that position, because that can lead to unwarranted criticism or abuse, either way. If we had the city manager be independent of that, and he works for the council anyway, and we need to compensate him appropriately, but it removes that conflict of interest, in my idea, which hopefully will make Aaron's job and Stephanie's job a little easier. So anyway.
Further discussion. Hey, I had Rob and then Eric. Rob?
Yeah, the biggest con that, or the biggest negative to having the manager in the bargaining or the non-bargaining group, but it actually becomes a bargaining group at some point, is that council doesn't have a single employee that actually is in a position to be neutral or unbiased. And, you know, economists call it the spillover effect, when you've got collateral effects of one economic decision spilling over into nearby decisions. What council, I think and hope, has learned in the last couple of years is that every single union, every single bargaining group affects every other. So when one gets a COLA, another gets a COLA. When the non-bargaining group, our managers, didn't get a COLA, you know, it was, we got to see on this screen that they hadn't gotten a COLA. So now we gave them a COLA. So everything is interrelated. Every single bargaining group is interrelated due to the spillover effect. As a result, every time we have a discussion about any of the bargaining groups, essentially our senior staff have a bias, because eventually at some point, as the bargaining groups push up from below, it affects their compensation, if not that year, then the next year or the year after. So council doesn't have a single employee that is in an unbiased, neutral position that could actually discuss this thing with council from an unbiased position. To me, that's probably the biggest reason to have the manager outside of a bargaining group. You know, and if you look at the example that we just had, there wasn't a single, to my knowledge, a single staff person who who spot checked any of McGrath's work. There wasn't a single staff person that said to McGrath, how can you justify that being 20% above Southern Oregon averages or above even state averages? How can you justify that? How can I take that back to council? There wasn't a single staff person that checked that work, or that asked for that clarification, or certainly got that clarification before they wrote the check. So as long as we have the guy that's writing the check be inside the bargaining group and inside the group that's being studied, there's a major conflict there. The person who writes the check and is dealing with the contractor and gets explanations from the contractor needs to be unbiased and needs to be working for council, needs to be working for the taxpayers. And that's not what happened last time. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to repeat that mistake. I already made that mistake once. I want to correct that mistake. So I want to see the manager, because I think that he'll be able to do a better, unbiased job for council, for the taxpayers, if he's not involved with every other bargaining group, one way or another.
Thank you. Further discussion, I got Eric and then Victoria and Kathleen. Eric.
So I guess I want to go ahead and agree with what Joel said and what Victoria was talking about with the consultants for this. I agree with that, but I will say that, you know, what Joel was saying about that we put the staff in a not in a good position. Well, I just want to point out it wasn't us that put them in the position. It was the history. So we're doing the best we can to try to make this work, and we're trying to make sure that the taxpayers don't get the short end of the stick here. And as far as this goes, I think we do need, if we're going to hire a consultant, which we just agreed to, let's include this decision in there as well.
Thank you. Further discussion, I have Victoria and then Kathleen. Victoria?
It may be a good idea to separate the city manager, but since we are going to have someone, we're going to pay someone, we should get their expertise about that before we make this decision.
Further discussion, I have Kathleen.
Well, so I'm not clear if that is separate. I mean, I'm in favor of an outside salary schedule, but does that exclude that if we put this under the consultant?
So as some of the council members stated, you could still choose to have, in the end, the city manager standalone and not in the salary structure. You could utilize this consultant to give you at least a range of where the city manager should be, and then you can have that removed and dealt with fully independently, but at least you'd have the information on what the range may be that you'd be working with.
Perfect. Any further discussion? I got Victoria and then Seth. Victoria?
So I would just like to make a motion to defer this action and put it towards the consultant, the action, defer it till after the consultant gives us the information about it, and then we can bring this back as a discussion point with that information. If that is clear, Mayor.
Yes, that's clear. So we have a motion on the table for to add to the third-party professional consultants plate to evaluate city manager being taken out of the salary structure and to give recommended ranges. Is that what you were talking about?
Well, just, yes. I mean, would it, in the consultant's best judgment, would it be a good idea to do this or not? And why? And then we don't have to take their advice at that point. We can, you know, discuss it from there.
So for clarification, your motion is to ask the third-party professional consultant to evaluate taking the city manager out of the salary, non-bargaining salary structure.
Yes,
only.
that's, well, not only, but also, I mean, the other option would be for them to give us feedback on what their salary should be. So I just want to get the range of possibilities from the professional. So I would like the professional consultant to evaluate whether or not our proposal that we're putting forth today, which is to take the city manager out, is in their best estimation a good idea. But then they also probably should give us information, if it isn't in their estimation a good idea, what the salary range should be. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was just getting clarification. So do we have a second on that motion? A second from Rick? All right, so you have a motion to have the third-party professional consultant evaluate taking the city manager out of the non-bargaining compensation salary structure. If their recommendation is yes, then to provide council with salary ranges for city managers.
Yeah, I think originally it sounded like the motion was to include the city manager in the study, the city manager position in the study. and then to come back and consider whether or not to pull or not, what to do with the city manager after that, the city manager structure. But does council, I think the amendment to the motion was that they also make a recommendation on what to do. Is that correct?
Yes, that might be a difference without a distinction, but I would say more the opposite, is do they think it's a good idea for us to take the city manager out of the pay scale and out of the bargaining unit, non-bargaining unit? And so that's their one recommendation. And then they would also, yeah, so I guess it is a difference without a distinction. You were just putting one before the other difference that I was, I think.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I guess I will just look at the faces of councilors. Do you understand the motion? Okay. Further discussion on this, I had Seth and Indra and Joel. Seth?
I think I'm good for right now.
Thank you, Seth. Indra and then Joel? Seth? Sorry, Indra?
I don't know why we would defer. I don't see any significant cons to taking the city manager out, and I see a lot of pros, and I don't know that the consultant could tell me anything different for why to take them out. I think Aaron gave a really good presentation on the pros and cons of that, and I don't know that the consultant, that would be their charge. They're looking at the salary structure, and then if I'm not mistaken, even if we take the city manager out now, we could still include him in the consulting work to give a good range of where city managers are. So I don't see any pros to deferring this. I think if we know what we want to do, we should just decide that now. And I think we can with the information we have.
Further discussion, I have Joel and then Seth. Joel?
Well, I think Victoria had a good idea in making sure that the consultant comes back as long as he or she is doing the work and coming back with a range of salary. If it comes back at $200,000 or $300,000, that really doesn't influence this decision in my mind, because it's a appearance of conflict of interest that we need to deal with in a timely manner. And so regardless of whether the city manager gets reimbursed at whatever level, I think we need to remove that appearance of conflict of interest.
Further discussion, I had Seth.
So, I mean, if we take the city manager out right now, then we would still have to come up with our own structure, correct?
Well, the discussion would be so far that would just, the position of city manager would also be included in the study. You'd have that information, you do it independently of what you do with the non-bargaining, but you would have a range that would be recommended.
Well, I know, but if we take you out right, like let's say hypothetically right
Nothing, there'd be no change to what's right. I'm at a step 10 right now anyhow, but there would be no change to my salary if I was independent or if I was in the bargaining unit.
Okay, got it, okay.
Any further discussion? Victoria?
So I think that if we are going to go ahead with a consultant, they probably would be able to add some valuable information for us that we may not have thought about. And there's no harm in getting more information. And then I am not stating at this point that I'm opposed to this action. I just think it would be a really good idea to have someone who works in that area to give us some feedback about it. Since we're going to do it, we may as well take advantage of it.
I completely understand what you're saying. Cross the T's, dot the I's. Further discussion, I have Rob.
Yeah, I think Joel hits the nail on the head. We have, at a minimum, a perceived conflict of interest every time we discuss anything to do with compensation with any of our bargaining groups with our current situation. And whether it's an actual conflict, you could even make a case for that, and some possibly. So, do we want to get rid of our perceived or possible actual conflict of interest? I mean, I do, and it's frankly, that's really, really simple to me.
Further discussion, I have Indra.
Yeah, just a final comment. We defer a lot of things, so I think if we know what we want to do in this situation, we should just make a decision now on that.
All right, further discussion? We currently have a motion on the table to add city manager's analysis to the already approved motion for the third-party consultant with a second. And I will go into vote. So Victoria?
Yes.
Joel?
With respect, no.
Thank you, Joel. Eric?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Seth?
Yes.
Rob?
No.
Indra?
No?
And Rick?
Yes.
Okay, so that does pass going forward, so the motion passes to add the city manager evaluation to, or analysis to the third-party consultant's plate. Thank you very much. So that would, I would perceive, table this to a date certain, and so that concludes that discussion. And next on the agenda is agenda review. Within agenda review, we have Parks Advisory Committee motions. Do we have those? Do we have any parks? I apologize, I'm not seeing it.
Can we read it?
Yeah, if you could go ahead and read that for us, Aaron, that would be most
All right,
beneficial.
Parks Advisory Committee made a motion. The motion made to recommending to adopt regulations restricting unauthorized motor vehicles on Dollar Mountain that include dirt bikes, ATVs, and UTVs. Call to action, ask for a council workshop, put on a council business meeting, or take no action. They made a motion recommending to re-engage with Beacon Hill Park Development and wanted to know future council action for a workshop or business meeting or take no action. I believe we are handling the one, which is the Dollar Mountain and updating the code to provide for additional enforcement from that perspective. So the one motion for follow-up would be recommending to re-engage with Beacon Hill Park Development. And I believe that's also on your agenda to have a discussion about Beacon Hill Park. So I think both of these motions are taken care of. I'm seeing Bradley shake his head. You are currently addressing both of these motions.
Correct. So we brought that to your attention just to verify that we do have those two recommendations from the Park Advisory Committee on our future agendas for workshop discussion. Any questions in regards to that? All right, thank you very much. Within the agenda review, anything anybody wants to discuss or has any questions in regards to the upcoming Wednesday business meeting? Kathleen?
Well, it's not necessarily, it was a request. Can we make requests right now?
The question is for, do you have any discussion or questions in regards to the upcoming business meeting agenda, which would be within the packets that you've already received or had been available printed so you could digest? We will move on to your recommendations in a little bit. Joel, anything about Wednesday's meeting?
No, this would be in addition to that.
Okay. Again, anything about Wednesday's meeting? All right, thank you. Next would be any items in regards to calendar events or agenda setting. That would be where you guys want to talk. Okay, Kathleen first and then Joel. Kathleen.
So I wanted to make a request that at labor negotiations, we could have 2 council liaisons as observers according to ORS 243.650, the PECBA Act.
Yes, we'll take a look at that ORS, but right now, from a legal perspective, we want to make sure we're seeing what you're seeing, so we can respond to you at the next upcoming business meeting that are managed from our council and staff,
Okay.
Or via email.
or via email.
Okay, Joel?
We have the 250th year anniversary of our country coming up. We've got the 4th of July coming up. Traditionally, there's been some expenditures for fireworks. I don't know what our plans are, but we need to ask that question. The other thing is, and Brad, you may know this, you may not. It may be with your subordinate, he knows. I think it's the Garden Club, but a group of citizens have raised money to purchase some trees, and they would like to plant them on the 250th year anniversary of our country, and coordinate it with city staff as to where those would go. And I think there would also be a proclamation coming for you, Clint, to make on that. And then I had another person, and I don't know if we want to do this or not. It would involve staff time, but other cities place, and we don't need to answer it now, and I don't want it on the agenda now because I got to do some more work so we can make an informed decision and it's ripe for discussion. But banners of people who have served in our armed forces and perhaps have even given their lives. There's several towns, I think of Sherwood, where the family can purchase a banner, and like along the parkway, you have, but I don't know if we even got places to put them. They're very good banners. It's very well done. It commemorates all the family has an opportunity to commemorate their own members of their family that have served in our country and in our interest. But I'll do more work on that before we put it on the agenda. But we need to do those other things, especially with the, because it's coming up.
So there's 3 points here. I just want to make sure that we're clear. 4th of July, we still have 4th of July planned. We have monies budgeted. We're moving forward with that. If you want to have specific discussion about the 4th of July
No, I don't
event,
need any specific discussions.
And the second one were trees. I believe we could work with.
As a ceremony.
We can work with people, the people, I think, if you could please have them contact Bradley.
Okay, I think they've already contacted Josh.
Yes, they have been in communication with Josh.
Okay, so
Okay,
it
so-
looks
so
like we're
that's
moving
done.
forward with that. And then your third item was the Veterans Commemorative. That's something you said you were going to work on and maybe bring back later.
Yes, because I think there's some unanswered questions there. And the other thing is to make a proclamation, a public proclamation of the 250th year of our country's.
I have a proclamation for Tree City USA or something like that, but yeah, that's another one we can entertain definitely.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Clint.
Thank you. Further discussion, I got Rob.
Yeah, I just wanted to report back to the person sitting next to me, Indra. She had mentioned, and I brought it to agenda setting, that she wanted to have the city potentially reach out to the county commissioners to try to, we'll say, normalize relations between the city and the county. The last few years, we used to have, I guess, monthly meetings, I think, between the mayor and the city manager and the commissioners and so forth, and for a variety of reasons, those broke down. But I think that the mayor and city manager agreed that they would try to reinstill that sentiment that we want to work with them and possibly even have was it monthly meetings again with them?
Yep.
Monthly meetings with the manager. I think it's the manager and the mayor, I believe. Manager and the mayor?
Yep.
They were historically the manager, the mayor, and the council president.
Okay. Manager, okay, so I volunteer myself. The manager, mayor, council president to try to reestablish kind of a normal working relationship, or at least ongoing communication with the commissioners again.
So thank you for bringing that up, Rob. Yes, I do want to state over the first 12 months of being in office, there was a very strong outreach to county commissioners to do more coordination and organization. We started to do a little bit, but it kind of fell through because of the political turmoil, but we won't go into that. But I'm going to say drop the mic moment if you want to announce it. Well, I don't know what date it is. You go ahead.
Yeah, the Board of Commissioners have agreed to meet with us now. We're going to be meeting on the fourth Tuesday of every month and have discussions, so we're starting those relations again.
So ask and you shall receive. All right, I got Indra, Kathleen, and Rick. Indra?
Yes, I just want to put a little nudge. So I'm still hearing about crime problems downtown and in different areas of the parks. And so we've had this municipal court since December of '25. I understand that Stephanie's been very busy with things, but I see things that we are putting on the calendar that in my mind are not nearly as important as that coming to a workshop. So I just want to nudge that, along a little bit if possible, if you have any thing to say about that. But also included in that, a long time ago, Mayor Scherf talked about exclusion zones, that some surrounding cities have them and we don't. So I would like that to be, I don't know if that's part of the discussion with municipal court or if that can be a separate, easier, quicker thing to do. If it's a quicker, easier thing to do, I think we should get the exclusion zone on there first, and then the municipal court.
So
Thank you.
I'll address the exclusion zone. It's something the mayor's been talking with me and staff about. We will be doing a memo on the exclusion zones for you, and that's one of our top priorities from a memo perspective.
Yep.
And then I'll let Stephanie address the municipal court thing, some of the decisions you made.
Let me preface really quickly. So those two items you brought up, yes, have been a topic of discussion in almost every agenda-setting meeting that I've participated in since those topics were brought up. And there is a mountain, which Stephanie's going to address here, there is a mountain of information that needs to be researched and developed for municipal court. And I believe that our staff is doing to their best ability to gather that information. But just to reiterate, I have continued those conversations on those two items on almost every agenda setting meeting that has happened over the last year and up to this point. We had a pretty lengthy discussion just this last one with Kathleen and Rob in regards to that. So Stephanie, if you could give us a little bit more on the municipal court.
With municipal court, given council's direction today to bring in the third-party consultant on the non-bargaining, I'll be able to shift my focus and bring that to you as soon as possible.
Yep. Again, ask and you shall receive. I got Kathleen and then Rick. Kathleen?
I was part of the vote that asked for the natural playground at Riverside Park, but I'd like to reconsider that vote. I think I was part of the majority that wanted that, but I was wanting to bring that back to reconsider the vote. How do we make that happen?
So I believe that we're having some discussion on that.
Is that associated with the pump track also?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. We do have the pump track listed on here on the agenda for discussion, so it is sort of bringing back. We currently are sort of on a pause when it comes to the natural playground versus the pump track there, recognizing there is council that may want to have that direction. So we're sort of waiting for this next discussion item about the pump track to provide additional direction before we move forward with anything at Reinhardt Volunteer Park.
Okay, I got Rick and then Joel and then Rob. Rick?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, Joel?
Just for people's knowledge, I think you know about it. It was in your email, but there's a lot of emails. There's going to be a recreational needs assessment, and Brad, you probably are aware of it. I think it's Thursday, maybe it's Wednesday. Wednesday, you're right, Wednesday. Costs $5 to go. I guess it pays for the guy that's going to facilitate the meeting. It's sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce, but it's a very common methodology where they look at the recreation and they'll look at mountain biking and pump tracks and hiking trails and natural playgrounds and all those kind of things, and look at our needs, wants, and desires. So that will hopefully provide some good information for us, and if you want to come, respond to that email.
All right, thank you, Joel. Further discussion, I had Rob and then Victoria and Indra. Rob?
Yeah, just a slight further clarification. I know that municipal court is definitely high on Clint's priority list. What we discussed at agenda setting, just to be a little bit more clear, is that just briefly, from brief discussion with Stephanie, we had heard how other municipalities. Part of how they fund the municipal courts are very often with red light camera revenue. And then we had also discussed the fact that it was at SB 48, the problems that the sheriff has potentially with the jail. So there was about 4 different discussions that are all part and parcel of the municipal court discussion. In other words, how would we fund it if we were actually to arrest more people? Would we have any more teeth? How, you know, all those things. So it is, and now obviously Stephanie's saying she has more potential time to be able to focus on it, but it's about 4 things that are going to have to dovetail together, or at least be discussed together. So we can look forward to all that in the future.
Thank you, Rob. Victoria and then Indra. Victoria?
Yes, I'm not sure that I see it on the agenda. It could be in here, just written differently, and I just haven't noticed it. But I was curious about Chief Sanchez, about the Medic Zero. I think maybe we're going to be getting a presentation on that, and if that's something that could be put on the agenda or for workshop, or just maybe a little bit of an update on that. Yeah, so I'll let you take it from there, Chief Sanchez.
Well, thank you for asking that question. We do monitor that. That is data we get from 911 regularly. There is stuff that is coming down the pipe in the future that we'll be more than happy to present you with, but based off of everything that's been going on with the agenda setting and stuff, when we're ready and the X team gets together, we'll be happy to discuss any questions you have with that. But yes, that is something that we regularly monitor.
Oh, is there a possibility for our department to be able to, with, you know, budgetary concerns, to be able to fund Medic Zero in a different way or something like that? I may have just been totally off. You're telling me you just monitor the Medic Zero, and I remember that it is pretty high, but it seemed, I don't know where I heard it, but there was a possibility for our department to be able to have funding for that.
So when you say funding, Medic Zero is a measure in the county/city as a whole, to where when you dial 911, then the current ambulance service company that we have here within our city is unavailable. Now with our professionals, we respond to all of those calls within our jurisdiction, and we are there every time, either before them usually, and we're providing that same level of service, if not higher, I would argue, because our guys are very well-trained professionals. So if you're gonna go, the funding aspect of it is, when we talk about that in the future, I'll put a whole package together. There is a lot of cities that we bill insurance, and that is something that we can discuss in detail, and I'd be more than happy to provide whatever the city manager wants, a memo, email, whatever you guys would like with that.
Oh, yeah, I would love to have more information on that. That's what I was getting at, I think, and thank you so much for that.
I think if council's concerned with the Medic Zero, the calls that we're getting, and we're concerned also, I think maybe this would be a good topic. Ambulance services is done for the county through AMR. Now, of course, we respond, and we have paramedics who can respond and do those kind of things, and that's great. But ambulance services is not at this time a city responsibility, it's a county responsibility. And we should really address it there first. So I think that might be a good item for us to put on the agenda as a first discussion point coming up at the end of this month, is maybe we talk about the county. I know the county is looking at their AMR contract also, so I think it may be good for us to approach that and have those initial discussions with the county on this.
Okay, and then have a memo on that, possibly letting us know about.
Providing updates on where it goes.
On that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Further discussion, I got Indra and then Joel. Indra.
Yes, I just wanted to mention Friday, the Chamber of Commerce Awards banquet, which was really nice and fun. And I know Seth and Joel, myself, Aaron, Brad was there, got to sit at his table. But just a great event that honored so many individuals who work in our community to help businesses and a lot of business owners, and it was just an honor to be there.
Joel.
I'm not sure it needs to be, well, I'm sure it doesn't not need to be an agenda item, but if we could have a memo when it's appropriate and timely, and your judgment would be appropriate, updates on the, what is it, the first 200 feet or whatever they call that, the urban renewal project.
The first 40 feet?
First 40 feet now, in Northwest Grants Pass. And we could, if you wanted to, if it was significant enough, we could make it an agenda item or at least a memo when there's something to report.
All right, thank you. Any further discussion in regards to agenda review? All right. Going once, going twice? All right, I think we're done. I don't see anything else on the agenda, so thank you very much for your participation, and it is time to go. Thank you.